네, 시작하겠습니다. 여러분 안녕하십니까? 지금부터 서울사이버대학교 심리상담대학 및 미래사회전략연구소 주관으로 진행하는 2023년 국제상담심리세미나를 시작하겠습니다. 야. 네, 감사합니다. 이번 세미나는 상담 및 심리치료의 최근 동향, 스웨덴, 미국, 한국을 중심으로라는 제목으로 진행합니다. 본 국제세미나는 현재 서울사이버대학교의 국제회의실에서 동시 통역으로 진행되고 있습니다. 그리고 저는 이번 세미나의 사회를 맡은 서울사이버대학교 심리상담대학 상담심리학과 교수 한수미입니다. 반갑습니다. 네. 오늘 국제상담심리세미나의 취지에 대해서 잠깐 설명드리겠습니다. 본 세미나는 2021년을 시작으로 어느덧 3회째에 접어들었습니다. 우리 서울사이버대학교 심리상담대학과 상담심리대학원에서는 정규교과 외에도 재학생들의 다양한 요구에 부응하는 특강을 지속적으로 제공해 왔습니다. 그러나 지난 몇 년간 코로나로 인해서 이 대면 강의 등이 어려워지면서 그동안은 온라인으로 진행해 오던 본 세미나를 이제 오프라인으로 개최하게 되었습니다. 그래서 이에 그동안 우리가 연구 협력을 지속해 오던 미국과 스웨덴의 저명한 교수님들을 직접 이 자리에 모시게 되어 더욱 영광으로 생각하고 있습니다. 박수 한 번 더 할까요? 감사합니다. 네, 참고로 지난 2021년과 22년에 진행된 세미나는 현재 우리 대학 유튜브 채널에 업로드되어 있습니다. 그래서 관심 있는 분들은 찾아보시면 좋겠습니다. 이번 국제상담심리 세미나는 특히 스웨덴 교수님 2분, 미국 교수님 1분, 그리고 국내 교수님 1분 이렇게 총 4분을 모시게 되었습니다. 네, 그러면 이제 본격적으로 국제상담심리 세미나를 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 서울사이버대학교 이은주 총장님께서 본 세미나를 위해서 환영사를 해주시겠습니다. 큰 박수로 맞아주시면 감사하겠습니다.
여러분 안녕하십니까? 반갑습니다. 제가 그 사회자인 한수미 처장님하고 좀 서로 사인이 안 맞아서 그 환영사를 영어로 저는 준비를 했거든요. 그래서 지금 통역기를 좀 이렇게 껴주시면은 좋겠습니다. 죄송합니다. 제가 이걸 잘 읽기 위해서 앉아서 하겠습니다. 예. Distinguished guest, 통역기 준비하시는데 좀 기다리겠습니다.
채널 1번입니다.
채널 1번이 한국어인가요? 영어? 예, 상관없이 1번을 하시면은 그 통역이 된다고 합니다. 다 끼셨나요? 예. Distinguished guests, esteemed faculty members, participants, I would like to extend my heartfelt congratulations. Welcome to all of you attending International Counseling Psychology Seminar on recent trends in counseling and psychotherapy. This remarkable gathering of brilliant minds from around the world underscores the importance of psychological well-being in our rapidly evolving society. Today, we have a privilege of hosting influential figures in field of counseling and psychotherapy. I extend warm welcome to our esteemed speakers, Dr. Jung-ho Kim from Deokseong Women's University, Korea, Dr. Michael Lewin from California State University, San Bernardino, United States, Dr. Alexander Rosenthal and Dr. Monica Burman from Uppsala University, Sweden. Each of them bring a wealth of knowledge and experience and expertise that undoubtedly enrich our understanding of recent trends in counseling. I would like to specially mention our long-standing partnership with the Swedish universities, which spans over 20 years. It began with my initial visit and signing of a collaboration agreement between School of Social Work in Stockholm University and SCU. This partnership has extended to include various social science areas, including counseling, psychology, and Uppsala University. Throughout the years, we have jointly organized seminars, forums, and research projects fostering long bond between our institutions. Furthermore, California State University San Bernardino holds significant importance to our partner. Prior to pandemic, our university conducted a student exchange program, enabling students from each institution have exciting cultural experience, participate in summer certificate programs, and even engage in orchestra music performances. Additionally, professors from SCU have served as visiting scholar at CSUSB, conducting research, fostering international network and collaborations. As the president, I highly value this precious opportunity resulting from our international partnership, which facilitate our students' professional growth and our faculty's international engagement. I'm delighted to see we have gathered here in Korea despite the challenge posed by pandemic after our previous online international seminar. I would also like to express my gratitude to the organizer of this seminar, professors in School of Psychology and Counseling and the Institute of Future Social Strategy at SCU. To all the students, participants attending this seminar, I encourage you to make the most this opportunity, engaging in fruitful discussions, seek new perspectives, and form lasting connections with your peers. In conclusion, I deeply honored to witness coming together of such remarkable individuals at this International Counseling Psychology Seminar. I'm confident their presentation discussion will inspire us all to embrace recent trend in counseling psychology as we strive to create more compassionate, supportive world. Thank you. I wish you all successful enlightening seminar ahead. 감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다. 서울사이버대학교 이은주 총장님께서 본행사에 대한 축하의 인사를 해주셨습니다. 이제 본격적으로 저희가 강의에 들어가기 전에 포토타임을 가지려고 합니다. 모두 우리 플랜카드 있는 이곳으로 나오셔서 포토타임에 임해주시면 감사하겠습니다. 네. 지금부터 총 4분의 교수님들께서 발표를 해 주실 텐데요. 첫 번째 발표를 해주실 마이클 루인 교수님에 대해서 잠깐 제가 소개해 올리겠습니다. 마이클 루인 교수님은 미국 오클라호마 대학교의 주립대학교에서 임상심리학으로 박사 학위를 받으셨고요. 현재 캘리포니아 주립대학교 샌 버나디노에서 심리학과 학과장을 맡으시면서 이상심리, 행동수정과 관련된 교과목을 가르치고 계십니다. 마이클 루인 교수님은 작년에 이미 이어서 올해에도 우리 학교 본 세미나에 참여해주고 계시는데요. 작년에는 온라인으로 그리고 올해에는 이렇게 오프라인으로 참석해주고 계십니다. 오늘은 특히 심리치료의 범진단적 접근이라는 주제로 발표를 해주시겠습니다. 큰 박수로 맞이해주시면 감사하겠습니다.
While we're waiting for the PowerPoint, is the translation on? I just want to thank Seoul Cyber University, the faculty, the students for coming out today. The hospitality has been unbelievable. I've never been treated so well, and excited to talk with you today about transdiagnostic approaches to psychotherapy. There'll be a PowerPoint coming up in a second, but I guess I'll get started just because I have a script here. Or would you rather me wait till they can see the PowerPoint? I can start popping up. Oh, here it is. All right. Occasionally, I may look back at the PowerPoint just because to trigger the thoughts I want to say. So anyway, in the theme of current trends in psychotherapy, as you may know, there's been a movement towards looking at transdiagnostic types of therapies. That is, therapies that aren't necessarily designed for a specific mental disorder, like, say, cognitive behavioral therapy for social phobia, or cognitive behavioral therapy for panic disorder, or for major depressive disorder. one of the things that you'll see, I don't know how, can I advance the PowerPoint here? All right, so for our agenda for today, we're going to talk about the problems with the proliferation, of many specific disorder protocols that are designed to treat the one specific diagnosis. But as you are students of psychology, you're probably learning also that many of the individuals who meet criteria for a mental disorder often have meet the criteria for multiple mental disorders, not just one. So if we're treating one disorder with a protocol, what's becoming clear is that when we treat those individuals, that they also have other difficulties. There's also a lot of overlap among symptoms, core symptoms, across various emotional disorders. When I use that term today, I'm primarily talking about anxiety disorders. That includes obsessive compulsive disorder, social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, but also major depressive disorder and the eating disorders as well. So because there's been so many different protocols developed for each individual disorder, there's been a problem with students such as yourselves learning all of these different protocols. So there's been a movement to look at treatment approaches that sort of target the common features that we see across these different disorders. And today we'll review some of those. My agenda here today also going to talk about the concept of neuroticism. Dr. David Barlow has been doing research on this concept again. It's the new version of neuroticism. We're going to talk about people who are highly sensitive emotionally, who become very perturbed and disturbed by the experience of their emotions, and then engage in emotional avoidance or avoidance of different kinds of situations that are associated with their strong emotional responses. We'll talk about a triple vulnerability model for psychological and emotional disorders, and then specifically we'll go into detail about the unified protocol for transdiagnostic treatment of these disorders. As you may be familiar with the DSM and the ICD, many different disorders and treatments have been linked to specific diagnoses. And this was an important development early on because in the United States, at least, insurance companies were not wanting to pay for psychotherapy. And the American Psychological Association put together a task force in the 1990s in order to provide evidence that psychotherapy does work. And the way they did that was by developing specific protocols for specific disorders to show the effectiveness of our treatments. And that was a success, at least in the United States, because insurance companies now cover individual psychotherapy. And what I've learned about Korea is that that's not necessarily the case yet. Hopefully, that'll be a benefit that Korea will experience soon. So because of these proliferation of different manuals, we basically have tons of different manuals, and I'll just show you the next slide. Just to name a few, and I'm not going to go through these, but this is not even an exhaustive list of various treatment manuals that have been shown to be effective for a variety of problems, from insomnia to schizophrenia to generalized anxiety disorder, you name it. You guys are students, so imagine you've had to memorize all of these protocols in order to be able to maybe do counseling with any kind of client that might come through your door. So this is becoming an issue in training, but also for therapists who may want to work with various types of clients. They are not wanting to necessarily have to buy all these manuals and then memorize these manuals as well. So some general themes here about transdiagnostic approaches. They look for the similar core processes that go across the disorders. So some examples are inflexible thinking patterns, where people, let's say with anxiety, always think the worst, or always see danger and threat in situations that are not really that dangerous. So inflexible thinking patterns are usually targeted in transdiagnostic approaches, as well as emotional dysregulation difficulties, experiential avoidance or avoidance of thoughts, feelings, or anything that makes people upset. And other maladaptive coping strategies could include overeating, non-suicidal self-injury. So these approaches, these transdiagnostic approaches, can treat a variety of different disorders like OCD, panic disorder, etc., with a similar protocol, one manual, as opposed to hundreds of manuals. And these approaches use evidence-based therapy techniques that you might be familiar with if you've taken courses on evidence-based therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy. They utilize those approaches, but they utilize it to target these core common processes that you see across the various disorders. This slide's a little dense, but I wanted to list some other transdiagnostic protocols, give them some credit, but I'm not going to have time to discuss them today. But there's general cognitive behavioral therapy that targets transdiagnostic processes. You've probably heard of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, targets common core themes of experiential avoidance, mindful awareness, developing values-based actions, and developing what they call psychological flexibility. And that is used to treat a variety of different disorders. Therefore, it's a transdiagnostic therapy. Dialectical behavior therapy you may have heard of as well, DBT. This approach was originally developed to treat suicidal behaviors and borderline personality disorder. However, more recently, the skills-based packages that target distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, emotion regulation difficulties, and mindfulness, this approach has been used transdiagnostically as well. Today, I chose to focus on the unified protocol for transdiagnostic treatment of emotional disorders, partially because of the evidence base behind this treatment, and it is a pure transdiagnostic treatment. In the UP protocol, some people call it the UP protocol, the transdiagnostic protocol focuses on, and we're going to talk about neuroticism, the tendency of some individuals to experience emotions very intensely and to become perturbed by that emotional experience and engage in emotional avoidance behaviors. And those emotional avoidance behaviors are the ones that usually get them into treatment. Because once you start avoiding different situations in life because you don't want to feel anxious or angry or depressed, then people's lives become more constricted and they're not able to sort of work effectively, have social relationships. It affects their functioning. So the unified protocol is going to target emotional awareness, increasing awareness, emotional avoidance in a very direct way. So here is the triple vulnerability model. I'll go through this a little quickly, but this model purports that there are three different sources of vulnerability for psychological disorders, more specifically for emotional disorders. And the first one you probably heard of is biological vulnerability. And in Barlow's model, he presumes that the concept of neurotic behavior, that is, the person who experiences emotions intensely, experiences them as adversive or painful or uncomfortable, and engages in avoidance behaviors so they don't get triggered. He believes that there's evidence for a genetic link that you may inherit a nervous system that's prone to that kind of experience. Another source of vulnerability is early childhood upbringing. In particular, the most common example is attachment, where young children have insecure attachments where they develop an unsecure sense of the world, and they may specifically develop a sense that the world is unpredictable, that they don't have very much control over negative events in their lives, and that they don't have significant or coping strategies to deal with negative emotions once triggered. So that's learned very early. That, according to Barlow, doesn't lead to a specific disorder, but these first two make you vulnerable to developing any one of the DSM or ICD disorders based on your specific psychological vulnerability. That is your specific learning history. So if you've had an experience, I mentioned earlier this morning in another talk that as a young man, I was chased up a fence by a German Shepherd that was trying to bite me as a young boy, and I developed a fear of dogs. So that in this model, they would say that if I did have a phobia, which I didn't, luckily, because we did get a family dog, but if I developed a dog phobia, I'd be more likely to develop a dog phobia if I had the biological vulnerability to an overactive nervous system. I had the general psychological vulnerability to feel like the world is out of control. I don't have control, it's unpredictable. But maybe because I don't think I inherited those vulnerabilities, that my dog experience didn't lead to a phobia. But if I did have those other vulnerability factors, perhaps it would have. I'm going to go through this really quickly because I kind of said it, but basically characteristics of neuroticism. This is going to be what we target in the unified protocol. Intense emotionality, a sense of an unpredictable world and dangerous one, being overwhelmed by the experience of one's emotions. So today I'm a little bit nervous. I was wondering where the PowerPoint was going to be up, but I'm feeling like I'm in control of my emotions, so therefore it's not getting out of hand. But in somebody with a vulnerability, perhaps that could, where they may have a panic attack or they may get so anxious that they can't think about what they want to say. And then last, a sense that you can't cope with the emotions if they were triggered. So the idea that if I do become depressed or angry or anxious, that I can't cope with that very well and something terrible will happen. So this neuroticism is presumed to be genetically, people are genetically vulnerable to it, but also can have learning experiences that reinforce the neuroticism. So I went over this, and I think in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this quickly, but generalized psychological vulnerability, this is where you have disruptive early developmental experiences, perhaps parents that are abusive or parents that aren't consistent in meeting their children's needs. Children may develop a sense that nurturance or that things are not very reliable and consistent and that the world is unpredictable. And that those can lead to changes in the brain that make us vulnerable later on to develop additional psychological experiences or negative reactions to stress that can lead to specific mental disorders or problems. The specific vulnerability, I mentioned that's like the dog example. What in our life, in our patients' lives' histories have happened that in this person who's neurotically vulnerable has led to a specific type of problem. A case that I remember treating where a child had a mom with panic disorder who saw his mom have many panic attacks and get very dramatic and scared. And the child learned that our body, the sense that our bodily sensations can be dangerous. And in that child, given their vulnerability, they may develop a very specific psychological disorder like panic disorder. All right, what is an emotional disorder? This is what we're going to really focus on today. So I mentioned before with neuroticism, Barlow and colleagues talk about the experience of frequent and intense negative emotions like anxiety, anger, depression, very emotional people. Not only if we all had strong emotions, but we weren't really perturbed by them at all or bothered by them, we wouldn't have this aversive reactivity to the emotional experience. That's another key feature that leads to difficulties in emotional disorder, is that we experience our emotions as aversive and problematic. And then last and not least, once we experience our emotions this way, we do whatever we can to try to avoid any type of activation of emotions. So with anxiety, it would be avoiding going to parties if you have social anxiety. With specific phobias, it could be any specific stimulus, whether it's in closed places, elevators, heights, that people may learn to avoid those because what they're avoiding are those situations, no doubt. But in this protocol, what we're going to target and treat is their avoidance of the negative emotional state that's associated with heights, that's associated with panic attacks, that's associated with parties and social situations. So it's transdiagnostic in the sense that we're not going to target social anxiety disorder or panic disorder. We're going to target emotion-oriented avoidance. Some concepts that are similar to this concept of aversive reactions, anxiety sensitivity. These are folks who find that the physical sensations of anxiety, they find it very unpleasant and they are anxious about it. And they actually have scales to measure anxiety sensitivity. The irony of this is, I always talk to my patients that some of you are so anxious about experiencing increased heart rate and maybe a little bit of excitement and sweat. But there are people that pay for that experience by going to amusement parks and getting on roller coasters, and they have a very similar experiential reaction, but they don't label it as a negative aversive event. So we're going to work with these individuals to try to decrease anxiety sensitivity, increase awareness of their emotional experience. Some people have a difficult time even identifying their emotions. And then certainly any form of avoidance of these emotional experiences are going to get targeted in the transdiagnostic protocol. This is a little too small to see, but I'm not going to give all the examples, but when we talk about emotional avoidance, there's overt avoidance, overt behavioral avoidance. I guess I'll give you one example, a party. Let's say somebody is socially anxious and they are invited to a party. If they engage in overt behavioral avoidance, they won't go to the party. They'll just avoid it completely. But there's other more subtle forms of avoidance, like that same person may not overtly avoid the party, but may go to the party and not talk to anybody, or stand in a corner, or if somebody's talking to them, they don't maintain eye contact. It's still a form of avoidance, but it's more subtle. Cognitive avoidance is trying not to think about things that are making people nervous. They may sort of try to suppress thoughts that are anxious thoughts. So if I'm having a thought right now, nobody knows what I'm talking about. That would make me anxious. I would try to suppress that thought by not thinking about it. That might be adaptive sometimes, but habitually that becomes maladaptive where a person is not fully engaged. They try to distract themselves, let's say. And then last, safety behaviors is something that comes more out of the panic tradition, but these are behaviors where individuals either carry lucky charms with them. So I've had clients who won't go anywhere without a bottle of water or their cell phone, or the wildest example is a woman I treated with panic disorder who carried a 20-year-old prescription of Xanax, a benzodiazepine, even though she wouldn't take the meds because they were probably expired, but she carried it with her because she felt like if they were there in case I needed it, I could go to the supermarket. That's called a safety behavior. But in this treatment protocol, they're all targeted because they are examples of avoidance of your emotions, but different kinds. I'm going to skip this because I kind of implied this, but this is a slide that says if you have a neurotic vulnerability and you have history and experiences with, say, physical sensations and non-clinical panic attacks, that a neurotic individual with a vulnerability may develop panic disorder. If you have uncertainty about negative evaluation and you're neurotic, you may develop social anxiety disorder. So the reason why this slide's important is that basically the neurosis is the core. The specific disorder that develops is more related to their learning history. And if we could try to learn a protocol for each of these problems, or we can learn what's the common ingredient across all of these and target that. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So anyway, with the protocol here developed by Barlow and colleagues, they directly target the core vulnerability of temperamental neuroticism, but more specifically, trying to enhance emotional awareness, enhance emotional acceptance and tolerance, that it's okay to be emotional, and combating emotional avoidance, restricting that. And the targets also additional is, and this is very important, the psychoeducation about how our emotions are actually adaptive. I work, my history of clinical work has been a lot with anxiety disorders, and people say, Dr. Lewin, I'd like for you to get rid of my anxiety. And in practicality, that wouldn't be very good because a little bit of anxiety is helpful. It's productive. It helps us prepare for challenges that we need. But the problem becomes when an individual experiences that anxiety is so aversive that they try to avoid it at all costs, their lives become unmanageable, and that's when they usually present for treatment. The protocol has 8 modules, 2 of which are, well, 8 modules. Basically, you start off by trying to enhance motivation for the treatment. For anybody who's ever worked with anxiety clients, they're very nervous and they don't want to do things that make them nervous. I don't blame them. However, in order for them to get improved, they're going to need to, at some point, start to approach those situations and emotions that they've been avoiding. So what we do in the first phase is try to enhance their motivation to engage in a challenging treatment, as opposed to just assuming because they came in that they're ready to change. I'm going to go through these quicker because I do have slides on each one of these. Psychoeducation and treatment rationale. We're going to particularly want to teach people about the adaptive nature of emotions, that emotions are useful to us, not necessarily harmful. The third module is emotional awareness training, helping people who struggle with being aware of their emotions become more aware and more accepting of experience of emotions. Cognitive appraisal and reappraisal is basically cognitive therapy, looking at thinking traps, automatic thoughts that are intensifying their emotional reaction, and doing some cognitive retraining work to help them think more realistically. Looking at emotion-driven behaviors and emotion avoidance, that's a very important part of the treatment. Interoceptive awareness and tolerance. Interoceptive means your awareness of internal physical sensations. Right now, I'm feeling a little hot up here, but my awareness of those sensations could be problematic if I were to start thinking that it means that I'm going to have a panic attack or something terrible is going to happen. I attribute it to the humidity and being up here and giving a talk, so it's not anything that I look at as dangerous. But in our neurotic or emotionally disordered individuals, they may look at it in a threatening lens. Situational emotion exposures is the majority of it. This is going to look a lot like traditional exposure therapy, where we have clients personalize and individualize different situations and emotions they've been avoiding and develop an exposure-based treatment plan to expose them, not so much to the situations, although that will be involved, but the goal is to expose them to the emotion, anxiety, anger that they're trying to avoid. And then last but not least is relapse prevention. Once the client has gotten to a point of improvement, what kinds of strategies can they maintain their gains? All right. So the first module is goal setting and enhancing motivation. I'm going to go through this quickly. Setting goals. Not all therapists do this at the very beginning of treatment, but setting very explicit, specific goals that are measurable, attainable, relevant to the problem, and time sensitive. But I think what's more interesting about this module is enhancing motivation. A lot of this comes from motivational interviewing, but this decisional balance worksheet is a worksheet that's a 2x2 looking at what are the pros and cons of making these changes and experiencing your emotions and not avoiding them anymore, but also looking at the pros and cons of not doing any therapy, of just staying the same. And what we want our clients to do is to really dig deep and look at what the pros and cons of putting in the work in therapy, what it'll lead. We're hoping that they see that the pros of change outweigh the cons of change, and that the cons of staying the same outweigh the pros of staying the same. By the way, staying the same, a lot of people struggle with that. A lot of our clients staying the same, a major advantage of that is you don't have to do any work. You don't have to do the difficult work of therapy. But the long-term consequence of that is that their lives become unmanageable. All right, understanding the nature of emotions. This is a nice little chart that goes over some basic emotions and what are the advantages or the adaptive value. You may know about some of these adaptive values, but many of our emotionally avoidant clients that come for therapy are not aware of these. And so a big part of the treatment here in Module 2 is understanding that anxiety isn't built to make us miserable. It's actually built in to help us be prepared for the challenges of life. But we'll get to another slide. But the issue isn't so much the anxiety. The problem is the avoidance of anxiety that kind of interferes with people's lives. But here's sadness. Sadness actually has an adaptive value because it makes us slow down what we're doing. It makes us withdraw temporarily, process why we're so sad and what typically the loss that we might have experienced is and what it means to us, and then eventually seek assistance and or social support. So even though none of us want to feel sadness, occasionally sadness is adaptive and that it allows us to really process what it is we're feeling sad about and what we've lost. Anger is an adaptive emotion because it allows us to stand up for our needs and protect ourselves. So it has an adaptive value. But of course, any of the people we see with emotional disorders, they've learned that these emotions are not adaptive. And the reason for that is that they often experience intense emotions. This is the famous inverted U curve. This one's arousal and performance. But basically, it shows that as you, I probably could use this if I knew what I was doing, but as you have low levels of arousal, you see, and moderate levels of arousal, you see increase in performance. You're better if you're somewhat angry to stand up for your rights. But if you get too angry, your responses become maladaptive and you might start screaming and yelling and destroying your relationships, calling people miserable names. Same thing with anxiety. Anxiety helps us prepare for exams when you have to study, for writing papers. But if it gets too high, a lot of people get overwhelmed and maybe start to procrastinate and their performance decreases. So we want to teach people that your emotions are your friend, not your enemy, and that they are designed to help protect us, and that the issue that they may be having is an issue of the appropriate levels of the anxiety they experience or emotions they experience, and learning how to manage that more effectively. This is just a chart that shows that emotions consist of behaviors, thoughts, cognitions, as well as physiological responses. We want clients to learn that all three of these components are part of their emotional experience. So for anxiety, the behavior might be freeze, attack, escape, or avoid. The thoughts might be, this is a dangerous situation, I won't be able to survive, I won't be able to cope. And physiologically, their heart rate may go up, they may have palpitations, lightheadedness, sweatiness, etc. So we want people to learn that this is all part of emotions and that they're adaptive, but when they become maladaptive, or basically when they become too intense and they don't know how to learn to manage them, this is where the problems start to develop. So the arc of emotions are antecedents to emotions, triggers of what makes us emotional. So it's different for every individual client, whether they have social anxiety or say obsessive compulsive disorder. The triggers will be different. In OCD, the trigger will be maybe uncleanliness or disorder. In social anxiety, the trigger might be giving a speech or talking to strangers at a party. And we want them to also look at both the short-term and long-term consequences of their emotions and their emotional behavior. So I don't know if this slide's going to work so well, but ARC, antecedent event, this is for anger. So a person cut in line, got in front of the line without waiting their turn. And that an emotional, that's the antecedent, the trigger. The response includes thoughts, physical sensation, behavior. So that guy is a jerk, is a thought. They might have felt hot and tense in their body. And the behavioral response is, I yelled at the guy and told him to get back in line. The short-term consequence of yelling and getting that off your chest is actual relief. It feels good to get tension out of your body. But the long-term consequence of this kind of behavior is the individual starts to have problematic relationships and consequences. So we're going to really focus on Short-term consequences of avoidance strategies, which are reinforcing because they reduce tension states. But in the long term, they're challenging consequences because their lives are becoming unmanageable or restricted because they're avoiding these emotions. All right, module 3, mindful emotional awareness. Not everybody has a really good sense of their emotions, but even if they do, often individuals, when they experience the emotions, they have thoughts like, this is awful, I don't want to feel this, I want to make it go away. What we want to do in mindful emotional awareness is a mindfulness strategy, is to have a non-judgmental, objective awareness of their emotional experience. We want them to also, in doing so, remove the judgment and stay present focused. So if let's say somebody was neuroticism and a propensity to have panic attacks and maybe avoid situations that trigger anxiety, we want folks to be able to sit with those feelings and have an objective, descriptive awareness. Notice what's going on inside in their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, but do that in a non-judgmental and in-the-moment sense. So present focused attention is a big part of mindfulness. It might be difficult to do this at first because emotions are intense, but we give psychoeducation that the reason our emotions are so intense is we need those kinds of intense kinds of experiences in order for our emotions to motivate us to perform properly in a situation that requires either fight or flight or standing up for ourselves. And then the non-judgmental awareness you probably have heard a lot about, and I know later we're going to hear in another talk about mindfulness, being mindful of these emotions without necessarily jumping to conclusions and just describing what the experience is like. These are some examples of being judgmental about having physical sensations. So I'm going to go down to, I'm noticing, so a person has tightness and they say, I feel like I'm going to get sick. That's judgmental. Whereas non-judgmental is, I'm noticing that I'm having tightness in my stomach. Notice the difference. One is focusing on just observing what's going on. The other is judging because you're saying that these physical sensations are going to make me sick. That's in the future what's going to happen. And another future would be these sensations are going to lead to a panic attack versus present focus, which is presently, right now, I am just feeling tightness in my stomach. So keeping them very much in the moment and trying to keep them non-judgmental about the experience. It's not easy, but lots of practice. So the way we do this is mindful mood induction exercises. So specifically, I'm just going to jump down to, we might use imagery exercises. We'll look at what makes them have their strongest emotions. And we'll actually just generate little scenarios where the individual will think about that to generate the emotion. And then we want them to practice mindful awareness in response to that emotion with non-judgment and present focused. In the protocol, they use some movie scenes. Sometimes maybe some of you know of a tearjerker or a sad movie. We might pick a scene from that movie, show that to the client to trigger, say, sadness. Sad music songs or meaningful songs to the client that maybe remind them of a past relationship and they've been avoiding those feelings. We might play that song or a music video that shows that as a way to help the client sort of experience that emotion, but do it through the lens of objective awareness, mindfulness, present focus, non-judgmental. Lots of practice. I'm going through this quickly, but this doesn't happen in one session typically. All right. The other thing about helping people do this well is they do a 3-point check. It's a fancy way of saying I'm going to look at and describe and notice my thoughts, my feelings, and my behaviors when I'm experiencing this emotion, and to be very mindfully present. So a 3-point check is a good grounding kind of technique for people where if they're starting to feel out of control, they could just think about, I'm having the thought that I'm anxious, I'm feeling hot and sweaty, and that behaviorally I'm feeling fidgety. as opposed to, I'm going to have a panic attack, I think I'm going to die, and I got to get out of here as quickly as I can. You can see that the different way of looking at the experience will either intensify the emotion or help modulate it. And we're going to teach them to be mindfully aware to help modulate their emotional reactions. Module 4 is standard cognitive restructuring. Many of you may have had class or coursework on CBT and identifying negative thoughts. In particular, in this module, the thinking traps, as they like to, Barlow's group likes to talk about, and looking at and teaching more flexibility, generating alternative interpretations to various situations that make us experience strong emotions. So we teach them to be more flexible in their interpretations. And there's two kinds of automatic thoughts that the Barlow group likes to target because he's an anxiety expert, but that is probability overestimation, where you overestimate the likelihood of negative events. So like today, if I was really nervous about public speaking, I might overestimate the chances of me passing out and fainting during the talk. If I do that, it's going to make my emotional experience a lot more intense. And then catastrophizing, that is taking an outcome that we are concerned about. So right now I'm very hot and I feel a little sweaty. If I catastrophize that outcome, I'd say, and I wouldn't be able to give my speech, as opposed to I would notice the sensations and be able to continue with my talk. So we do the standard cognitive restructuring by examining evidence. You may have heard of this, asking questions like, do I know for certain that I might get fired if my boss asked for a meeting and I think, oh my God, I'm going to get fired, I get anxious. Starting to do cognitive work and being more flexible, saying, okay, you might be that your boss is mad and you might get fired, but what are some other possibilities? That kind of work. All right, emotional behavior and counting emotional behaviors. I mentioned before the different kinds of emotional avoidance. I talked about overt avoidance, like a person socially anxious doesn't go to the party, and then the different kinds. So in this module, we are going to counter the emotional behaviors, particularly avoidance, for all different types of avoidance, from overt to more subtle to safety cues. So that woman with the bottle of Xanax, 20 years old, eventually we asked her to stop, to empty pill at a time. That's what it was. We did a graded, she emptied one pill at a time until the bottle was empty. And she did carry the empty bottle for a little while, but then eventually gave up on that. So we're going to target countering the emotional behaviors by targeting avoidance. The way we do that, I'm going to go through these, I'll get to the by doing exposure therapy. I'll go back because I see you guys are. So basically, if somebody is carrying Lucky Charms in order to feel comfortable on an airplane, like that Xanax bottle or a touchstone or a Lucky Charm bracelet, the short-term consequence is it might keep your mind off being anxious on the plane, but in the long term, it maintains the belief that you need those Lucky Charms to be able to get on the plane. Or you need to have a safe person with you. I might only get on a plane if I bring my support animal or my dog with me, but I never learned that I could get on a plane without my dog if I'm always bringing these safety objects. So in this kind of countering avoidance, we're going to try to get individuals to start to confront these situations without using these strategies they've used that actually prevent them from experiencing the emotion in an objective, mindful, non-judgmental way. Module 6, understanding and confronting physical sensations. For those of you who know about treatment of panic disorder, they developed back in the 90s an approach to treat panic that included the exposure to the physical sensations that people experience when they have panic attacks or anxiety. I was demonstrating for Dr. Hahn before that and I'll do it just quickly, one exercise is to have somebody spinning around in circles for about 30 seconds or so. And if you do this for a little while, I'm not going to ask anybody to do it, and I'm hot already, I'm going to start feeling more hot flashes, and right now I'm feeling a little bit dizzy, lightheaded. We do these kinds of exercises not to be cruel, but to help people realize you can experience these sensations and still move forward and do the things that are important in your life. Like my speech is not going to get disrupted just because I'm a little bit dizzy. And we do voluntary overbreathing. If you do that for a minute or so, you feel very lightheaded. If I had a little more time, I'm noticing the clock, I would do some more of these. These are important exercises for people whose emotional avoidance includes avoidance of physical sensations. So they're not just worried about being anxious, they're worried about being anxious and getting hot, or getting anxious and having their heart rate go up, or getting anxious and getting dizzy. And so in session, we will induce those sensations. I do it with the clients. I want them to see that modeling that it's not dangerous and being in there with them. And we do that as a way to reduce the distress and be more mindful of what it feels like to have those sensations in a non-judgmental and present-focused manner. We'll do some psychoeducation. Why do we have these sensations? Why do I have them? They always ask the question, why is this happening? It's happening because emotions, physical sensations, are sort of the energy behind our emotions and help motivate us to take care of business and to act accordingly. So if you weren't anxious at all about a paper that you had to write, you probably wouldn't write it. You have to have a little bit of anxiety to kind of motivate you and prepare you for the upcoming challenge of writing the paper. The other thing we talk about is situational context of these emotions is key. For instance, I mentioned earlier, some people pay money to get on roller coaster rides and experience lightheadedness, dizziness, and they love it. But our clients that we see in therapy don't look at it that way. So we use those as examples. And sometimes you actually find a client that is afraid of their physical sensations when they think it's a panic, but they do go on roller coasters. And so we try to show them that the discrepancy there, that what's different? Why are those sensations not causing you any discomfort when you're on a roller coaster versus because you are talking to people you don't know? All right, that's the physical induction record. When we do teach them these sensations, we have them record them and rate them. But in the interest of time, I'm going to get to the emotional exposures. This is a very important part. Basically, this is where the treatment will look a little like some of the specific manuals, but we're not targeting social situations only or incomplete situations, imperfect situations for people with GAD. We're targeting whatever it is that's relevant to that client. So it does look a little bit like a social phobia treatment if we're targeting only social situations, but it's not about the social situation, it's about the emotion that gets triggered. That's the core. Whereas the traditional package is targeting only those situations, not just necessarily the emotion that's triggered. It's natural for clients to want to escape. But we will review with them the long-term and short-term consequences. So if they escape, they'll feel better temporarily, but if they continue to escape, their problem will persist and maybe even get worse. So it's a short-term pain for a long-term gain. But human nature is that we're more motivated by short-term consequences, immediate consequences, than we are the long-term ones. Just think about a time you were nervous about something and you said, I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to call in sick, or I'm not going to go. Immediately, you feel relief because you don't have to go. Long term, you're saying, oh, I should have went. And now I'm not going to be, they're going to be mad at me, or I may lose my job, I may get a bad grade in my class, etc. This is just a standard emotion hierarchy where we rank the different emotional experiences from least anxiety producing to the most. We start with the easiest or least anxiety producing emotional exposures and work our way up to the ones that they feel would be the worst. Just talking about maintenance now, I notice I'm running out of time. We want people from this experience to learn that they can be mindful in their emotional awareness as opposed to catastrophic and looking at emotions as being dangerous, out of control, what problems it'll lead to. We want them to focus on describing, noticing what their emotion is, and just being very non-judgmental, objective in describing it, and present focus. So not thinking, I'm feeling hot and sweaty, I'm feeling my heart rate go up, and I'm going to have a heart attack. That's future focused. We also want them to develop more cognitive flexibility, to look at alternative interpretations about their emotions, that emotions are adaptive, that just because I feel anxious doesn't mean my life is out of control, that doesn't mean that I can't go to these different situations and perform work duties. So we want them to be like, that's why I spun around a little bit. I wanted to show that I can be dizzy and still do the presentation. It's sort of that idea. People could be angry, anxious, sad, but still live their lives. Very much similar to acceptance and commitment therapy. And then last, we want them to change their emotional behaviors. That is, approach emotions with a curiosity, with a willingness, with a tolerance, with an acceptance. That only comes through by doing their own exposure after the therapy's over. So we ask them to maintain their gains by continuing to do the exercises even after therapy's over. And we say to them, no shame in coming back. If you feel like the gains you made are starting to slip, we do want them to come back. But we also want them to develop skill sets that they could use to maintain the progress. This is a research study that Barlow did where they took a lot of patients, 100 patients, got the unified protocol with the anxiety disorders that you see up there, GAD, PDA, panic disorder, agoraphobia, compared that to people who had those same problems but got the specific treatment protocol. And this was an equivalent study. At first, they just wanted to demonstrate that at least if we did one protocol for all those problems, would it work as well as each protocol for those problems? And the results were yes. I won't go into all the numbers, but diagnostic criteria meeting was similar amongst these approaches. So it's sort of like a proof of, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, it gave credence that the unified protocol can work as well as all of those specific protocols. These are just some references where Barlow's protocol that you can get for the unified treatment protocol. It's kind of ironic. He has a protocol and just adding another one, except he would imply, or his research group, you only need the one protocol as opposed to the several that would be required before. So anyway, I'm sorry I went a little bit over. I don't know if we started late or not, or did I hit my number?
We will have a question time later. So
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
네, 박수 부탁합니다. 네, 이 방 온도가 좀 어떠세요? 그 온도를 좀 낮출지 스텝이 물어보시는데 괜찮으신가요? 제가 조금만 낮추라고 했습니다. 저 가만히 앉아 있는데도 조금 덥더라고요. 그래서 그 질문은 저희가 마지막에 한 번에 받도록 하겠습니다. 좀 시간이 타이트합니다. 오늘 네 분이 이렇게 그 발표를 해주실 건데요. 사실 오늘 이 세미나를 준비하기 위해서 한 5개월 이상을 저희가 굉장히 많은 분들이 협력을 해서 이 자리를 마련을 했습니다. 되게 귀하신 분들 모시고 했으니까 끝까지 잘 이 강의 듣고 집에 가셨으면 좋겠고요. 혹시 지금 이제 사실은 밥 먹고 시작되는 강의이기 때문에 졸려오신 분들 분명히 있을 거예요. 그래서 김한 교수님 한번 보세요. 손 들어주세요. 손 들어주세요. 저렇게 서 계시면 되겠습니다. 네. 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 자, 그리고 제가 보니까 여기가 약간 사각지대인데 책상이 없는 곳에 앉으신 분들 여기 조금 자리가 있습니다. 앞으로 좀 이동해 주셔도 될 것 같고요. 네, 좋습니다. 자, 지금까지 캘리포니아 주립대학교 샌버나디노의 마이클 루인 교수님이셨습니다. 그동안 네. 감사합니다. 그동안 상담 및 심리치료 현장에서 진행되어 오던 진단 체계의 문제점과 또 이에 따른 범진단적 접근 동향에 대해서 발표해 주셨습니다. 감사드리고요. 이제 두 번째 발표자는 바로 알렉산더 로젠탈 교수님이십니다. 교수님은 스웨덴 스톡홀름 대학교에서 임상심리학으로 박사 학위를 받으셨고요. 현재는 스웨덴의 최고 명문대라고 할 수 있는 웁살라 대학교에서 심리학과에 근무하고 계십니다. 우리 학교에는 지난 2019년도에 처음 방문을 한번 해주셨고요. 이번 방문이 두 번째이십니다. 또한 2018년부터 2년간 여기 계신 그 로젠탈 교수님을 비롯해서 스웨덴 교수진과 또 우리 심리상담대학 교수진이 공동 연구를 해서 2020년 국제학술지에 같이 논문을 공동 발표한 이런 경험도 있습니다. 로젠탈 교수님은 그동안 인터넷 기반 인지행동 치료와 관련된 아주 많은 연구를 해 오셨는데요. 현재 인지행동 치료 학회지의 편집장으로도 아주 왕성하게 활동을 하고 계십니다. 로젠탈 교수님의 이번 발표 주제는 바로 임상심리 분야의 디지털 치료 현황입니다. 그럼 큰 박수로 맞이하도록 하겠습니다.
All right. There's supposed to be a brain and a smartphone on this picture, so just picture that in your mind. It was a fitting picture for this topic, which is on digital interventions in clinical psychology, where a smartphone is one mode of distributing treatments. Oh yeah, you can show. You see the picture on your handouts there. So I'm going to give you an overview of what we know about digital interventions. And smartphone is one format, but we've done a lot of research on what we call internet-based psychological treatments. This is where you use a computer or your smartphone to access a treatment content similar to a self-help book. And I will give you some overview of the evidence of using these types of formats, and also talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of using digital interventions in clinical psychology. I'll also share some experiences from Sweden, since we've been administering treatments via the internet since almost 20 years now. So I'll put up this picture just to give you an overview of what we know of digital interventions in clinical psychology. And I put this arrow on top just to show you what format actually has the most research evidence. So as we go from the left to the right, you can see that the most research evidence today is on what we call internet-based psychological treatments. I will talk about that in a minute, so you know what I'm going to discuss here. But if we start on your left, you will see something called telehealth. Now, I'm just wondering, how many people in here have used the internet? I hope a lot of people use it, because since this is a cyber university. How many people have used video calls, like video conferencing? Most people, yeah? Like talking to a relative or a friend using your smartphone? Yeah. You can use that for delivering psychological treatments as well. And since the pandemic, a lot of psychologists have started using teleconferencing to see their patients. So it was a very good format to deliver treatments, despite the fact that we couldn't see each other during the pandemic. And this is usually referred to as telehealth. And it has some evidence, and we believe it's basically the same thing as seeing a patient face to face. The only difference is that you see it through the screen. So you can deliver treatments the same way as you would do in a therapy room. I've also added something called blended here, and that means that we can also deliver treatments in a blended format. So we can sometimes see the patients in a therapy room physically, and then switch to see the patients via a smartphone, via a video call. And this can be useful if the patient has a hard time coming to your therapy office. He or she might live far away or has to commute a lot. So blended treatments are a good way of administering psychological treatments for people who may not be able to show up in the therapy room all the time. I won't focus so much on this because it's basically the same, as I said, as delivering a treatment face-to-face. Virtual reality is another format, another type of digital interventions, and this is where you put on a head-mounted display and you can see things differently. You might be able to expose yourself for heights if you're afraid of heights, or expose yourself to a spider if you have spider phobia, without actually having to interact with heights and spiders. And this could be a nice first step in treating your anxiety. So a lot of people have started using virtual reality as a way of treating mainly anxiety disorders. And that's another very interesting research topic. I won't cover that in this talk, but it's another way of also administering psychological treatments. If we move over here, we can see smartphone applications. And that is where you use an application in your smartphone to get access to a specific treatment. And a lot of applications have been developed lately as a way of distributing psychological treatments. And I know that in the US, the Department of Veterans Affairs have developed several of these apps to military veterans, for instance. But as a private consumer, you can go into like the App Store and get hold of mindfulness applications to practice mindfulness. So those are examples of smartphone applications that can be used as part of a psychological treatment. And sometimes these are standalone. So these are referred to as self-guided treatments. So you basically download the app and you go through the program yourself. You don't need a therapist. But sometimes therapists combine these smartphone applications with your face-to-face treatment. And these are then referred to also as blended treatments. So maybe I see a patient who would be in need of mindfulness, and then I can ask the patient to download this app. We can practice together in the therapy room, and then the patient can go on and practice for his or herself. Now, on my right-hand side here, this is where I will talk the most today. It's about internet-based psychological treatments. What I'm referring to here is where you follow a treatment program on the internet, like using your computer or your smartphone, and where you do assignments and homework, and then get some feedback often from a therapist. And it's basically the same as following a self-help book. So you read maybe one chapter each week. You get a hold of a new concept in psychology. You might learn things about your depression, for instance, and then you do some practical assignments in association to what you have been reading. And these internet-based programs, they can be completely unguided. And that means you don't have access to a therapist. You do it on your own. And sometimes this is referred to as MOOIs, massive open online interventions. So you just access a treatment program online for free, and then you go through it yourself. And sometimes, and for some people, that can be enough. There are some programs for quitting smoking, for instance, that has some effects. However, the most researched topic and the area of research that has the most empirical evidence is what we refer to as guided self-help. And this is where you go through this internet-based program with the help of a psychologist, for instance. So that way you will get some feedback on what you're doing, and a psychologist will also check in and say, hey, how are things going? Do you need some help? So you get some support while going through the program. And sometimes this can also be part of a blended treatment. So you see the patient in the therapy room, and then he or she goes on to work on his or himself. And sometimes you don't see the patient at all physically, just through the internet. And then there's two types of delivery. It could be either synchronous, which means that the psychologist is chatting with the patient. So you have a chat. Or it can be asynchronous, which means that you send an email to your therapist saying, hey, I need some support. And then you will get the response maybe 24 hours later. So you still get some guidance, but it's with some delay. And these two parts, the synchronous and asynchronous guided psychological treatments, that is where we have the most research evidence. And some background, why do we deliver treatments via the internet or use smartphones? Well, basically, it has a long history, and it goes back to the 70s, because that's when we started to manualize our treatments. So before then, a lot of therapists delivered treatment on their own, maybe with some support from a supervisor, but we seldom had a manual to consult with. We didn't have a self-help book often to look at and distribute to the patient. But in the 70s, we started manualizing our treatments, putting together what's important in this treatment in a self-help book or a treatment manual. And this was a way of ensuring that therapists would do the treatment the same way, so ensuring what's called fidelity. It also put greater responsibility on the patient, meaning that with a treatment manual, with a self-help book, we can make sure that the patient takes greater responsibility in his or her treatment so that he or she can do things on her own. But one of the reasons why manualized treatments became popular was because insurance companies demanded some type of support for the treatments that they were reimbursing, and this was mainly in the US. So psychologists and researchers realized, okay, we need to manualize our treatments and research them to make sure, okay, treatments work for a specific condition, because only then would insurance companies pay for the treatment. And we also had this thing called evidence-based medicine, which gained popularity in the 70s, which basically says that, okay, we need to make sure that whatever delivery intervention that we are administering to patient, that it's founded on research and empirical evidence. And that goes both for medical interventions, like different types of medication, but also psychological treatments. So we started using these manuals as part of self-help books, and that was sometimes referred to as bibliotherapy. And when it comes to, I can't really see my pictures here, but you can see it in your handout. When it comes to the evidence of using bibliotherapy, it's actually pretty useful. It works a lot, both as self-guided treatments, but also together with a therapist. So in your handout, you can probably see different types of numbers here. And for the first picture shows how many manuals or self-help books was researched from the 70s and onwards. And you can probably see an increase in the number of self-help books and manuals that were produced and researched. So this means that we started doing more and more research on this topic. Now the latter picture, the picture below that illustrates the effects of using these types of treatments. And it basically shows that for a lot of conditions, self-help books, manuals, they do some good to the patient. It has some benefits. But it also shows us that when we deliver these treatments together with a therapist, we get better effects. So even though a self-help book is useful on its own, it's even more powerful if we use it together with a therapist. And that's basically has to do with the fact that sometimes people need more support, and that support can be provided by a therapist. Oh, here we go, perfect. So to your left here, we have the effect sizes for just a standalone self-help book. And on your right side, we have the greater effect sizes if these treatments are delivered together with a therapist. So it seems promising to use self-help treatments. But then, of course, people get kind of tired of using a book. People started using computers. So in the end of the 90s, beginning of the 20s, we had this thing called computers. And with computers came computerized, manualized treatments. So we started handing out CDs to people. And for those of you who are old enough to remember CDs, you put them into a computer and you can access the content of the CD. So this was before the internet. And it seemed to work pretty well. People could use these CDs to access a treatment. But then, of course, and I can just add that one of the CDs that was recommended by the National Institute of Clinical Excellence in the UK was something called Beating the Blues. So they could actually see that, well, this is an intervention, a standalone intervention that we can provide to patients, and it was mandated by a national authority here in the UK. And it has the similar outline as a bibliotherapy. You basically just follow a self-help book. But here using CDs. But then the internet made it possible to deliver these treatments online. So you don't need a CD, you don't need a disc or anything else. You can just go online and access these treatments. And the internet also made it possible to incorporate guidance, because people started chatting and sending emails to each other, and you could use these features on the internet together with a therapist. So this is where we started delivering manualized treatments via the internet with support from a therapist. So this was a major revolution. And people started doing a lot of research on depression in Australia, anxiety disorders in the Netherlands, and in Sweden we started doing research on headache and tinnitus. Tinnitus is when you have this ringing sound in your ear. And we showed that internet-based psychological treatments, they work for a lot of conditions. So it became part of regular healthcare in Uppsala, where we are from. So people could access internet-based psychological treatment for tinnitus already in 2002. And it became part of regular healthcare in Region Stockholm in 2007, and now for clinical disorders such as depression, social anxiety disorder, and panic disorder. And this is to give you just an example of what it could look like. So this is a study we did on perfectionism. So Michael, you talked about perfectionism being a form of avoidance behavior, and it can sometimes lead to great difficulties for people. So they experience a lot of negative consequences because they are very perfectionistic. They have high standards for themselves. So we developed the treatment together with Ross Shafran in the UK that we delivered via the internet. And this is basically what it looks like. You access one chapter each week, like here, understanding your perfectionism. And then you get some reading material, maybe some audio material, videos, and then some exercises that you're supposed to do. And then you get some feedback from your therapist. Now, this might not look exciting. It's very, very basic. There's not much effort put into the graphics or anything, but it works. And the good thing about keeping this very basic is that you don't need a fancy computer to access it. This is enough. And then you just go through the program. So in this case, the whole treatment package was 8 weeks, so 8 modules, and you're supposed to do 1 module each week and get feedback from your therapist. Here's an example of some of the conditions that we have researched in terms of the effects of psychological treatments delivered via the internet. We have somatic conditions like headache and tinnitus, like I said, but also IBS, cancer, chronic pain. And for psychiatric disorders and other problems, we have depression and panic, GAD, pathological gambling, and also procrastination and perfectionism, which is my line of research. So a lot of conditions can be treated via the internet. And here's just to show you how it has become a part of regular healthcare in Sweden. So the Internet Psychiatry Unit in Region Stockholm now provides free internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy to patients all over Sweden, which means that if you live up in Haparanda, which is very, very far north in Sweden, you can still access evidence-based care. You don't need to go to Stockholm to access it, which is good because Haparanda is, I don't know, far, far away. It takes 1.5 hours by flight to get to Stockholm. The good thing about internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy and psychological treatments delivered via the internet, it also fits in very well with this concept of stepped care. And this concept is about matching the needs of the patient with the resources that we have in like regular healthcare. So if your condition or your problems is not too severe, you might not need see a psychologist. It might be enough just accessing a internet-based treatment program like the one I showed you. So if you have mild to moderate problems, you can access these low-intensity treatments, which it's sometimes called, such as internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And then if you don't progress, if you don't see any benefits of that, maybe you can move on to get more intense treatments, which would mean that you see a psychologist face to face. So this is also a very good idea to see that we use our limited resources in regular healthcare in a good way. So if you have mild problems, maybe internet-based treatments is enough. But if you have more severe problems, then you can move on to access therapy face-to-face. So what are the advantages of using internet-based psychological treatments? First of all, you can administer self-report measures digitally, so you don't have to hand out pen and paper and ask the patient to fill in, how are you feeling today? You can do it via the internet and get some feedback from the patient immediately. So as a therapist, I can see within the treatment platform that, okay, my patient is feeling a bit better this week, or he or she is feeling worse. And then I can send that person a message to check in, how are you doing? So that's a good thing. Also, psychoeducation, like giving information about the treatment that we are providing, giving information about the condition that the patient is suffering from. We can do that online, in text, via video, via media. And this is very helpful for people who might have a hard time listening in to what the psychologist is saying in a face-to-face session. It's also a very nice way of going back to the treatment content after your session. So this is really improving the access to the treatment information that we want to provide. You can also provide the exercises and homework assignments online. So you don't need to hand out the paper and pencil version of everything. The patient can access it online, see, okay, what am I supposed to do? Then I go out maybe in the real world, try something out, come back, write how it went, and then get some feedback from the therapist. And the program content can also be accessed after the treatment has been completed. So after I've done my treatment dose, I can come back a year later and see, okay, what should I work on? Or do I remember everything? Do I need a catch up on how things are going? Which is very good for maintenance of your treatment progress. Like I said, you can also get regular feedback and guidance from your therapist. So this is really good. Sometimes there's a delay of 24 hours, but usually there's not a crisis, so you can wait that time. And then you get some useful information from the psychologist, like you should work more on this, or have you thought about this? And this way of administering treatments might also be more cost effective than seeing a patient face to face. Because of course, a patient needs to travel to the therapy room. That will probably cost some money and also some time. And these treatments administered online means that a single psychologist can see more patients and deliver treatments to more patients than seeing the patient face to face. So it could be more cost effective. The disadvantages is, of course, this requires a lot of time and resources and motivation from the patient. So not all patients would be a good fit for this type of treatment. Some patients need to see someone face to face. So you should always think of the matching. Does this treatment program online work for this patient, or should he or she see a therapist instead? And this also goes for internet-based treatments not being preferred by some patients. They might not like it. They want to have this physical connection with someone. And for some conditions, it might be the case that a face-to-face format is preferred. Like if you have a chronic conditions like schizophrenia, maybe internet-based treatment is not a good option. It could also be difficult to adjust the pace of the program. You're supposed to do a lot of things during this treatment program. So if you have 10 weeks on your hands, maybe that's a bit too stressful for some patients. They need more time. And sometimes it's difficult to adjust the treatment program. And for some patients, they may not have the verbal capacity to go through with a program because it's a lot of reading material. You have to do a lot of things on yourself, by yourself. And certain conditions might not be optimal for this type of treatment, like if you have reading difficulties, for instance. It might also be the case that some socioeconomic factors prevent the access to internet. So not all groups in society have access to a smartphone or internet. And of course, they need to get treatment in another way, like seeing a therapist face to face. So does this work? Is this a good way of delivering psychological treatments? Well, yes. When it comes to the efficacy, like the outcome and results of our treatments, we can see that we do see a lot of benefit. So this is a meta-analysis where you aggregate a lot of different studies to see what is the combined effect of internet-based treatments as compared to not receiving any treatment at all, being on a waiting list. We can see that the effect sizes, like the aggregated effects, are in the moderate to large range. So we do see similar benefits delivering treatments online as seeing a patient face-to-face, which is really good. So it's a promising way of delivering treatments. Again, it might not be suitable for everyone, but for those who find this a good match and go through with the programs, it could be just as good as seeing a patient face-to-face. If we compare this to seeing someone face-to-face in a study, because you also need to really check if we do this in a study, a controlled setting, and then randomly assign patients to either receive internet-based treatments or face-to-face treatments, do we see a difference between the effects? No, we don't. So here's another meta-analysis which only included these direct comparisons between seeing someone face-to-face and via the internet, and we couldn't see a difference between the two conditions. So again, it seems like a very good way of delivering treatments. And what about the long-term improvement? Is this just something that works for a short while, or does it work over time? So in this study, we looked at treatments where we had follow-ups for 3 years. So we followed patients for 3 years after they have treatment. They have completed their treatments. And when we look at the number of patients who have improved from their baseline, from the start of the treatment, we can see that the average is about 50%. So half of the patients, they improve so much from their treatments delivered online that they can be considered being improved or recovered from their condition. Is this a good number? I would say it's comparable to most of the conditions that we see treatments for, see patients for in face-to-face treatments. So about half of the patients do get better when it comes to these common mental disorders like anxiety disorders and depression. So this is basically comparable to seeing a therapist face-to-face. So that's good. We do know, however, that some aspects of delivering treatment are important. And when we talked about bibliotherapy, just following a self-help book, we could see that we got some slightly better effects if you had support from a therapist. And this is also shown in research of internet-based treatments. So although we do get some benefits of just going through a self-help book on our own, we get much better results if we also have a therapist working with the material together with us, giving us feedback, giving us some support. And this figure here just shows that the more support you get from your therapist, the better are the effects. So to your left here, this is the case where you only get a face-to-face contact in the beginning of therapy, so the first session or the assessment before you start treatment. If you add that to a self-help treatment, you get some positive benefits. So it improves the results a bit. If you have more contact, let's say that you also have regular feedback from your therapist, you get even more benefits. So it increases the results. And this goes on to also having support at the end of treatment and then to follow up. So basically, the more support you get from your therapist, the better are the effects from psychological treatments delivered via the internet. So this also shows that us as therapists or you who will become therapists in the future are still needed in therapy. So internet-based treatments are very useful, but we do need some support from the therapist to get that extra effect so that people get better. And this is the same for adhering to the treatment program. So we want to make sure that patients go through with the treatment program and do all of the exercises that are included. And this figure here just shows you that if we have no support, people drop out of treatment and may not complete the full treatment program, all of the 8 weeks, for instance. But if we have more support and even chat emails, we can see that fewer and fewer people drop out of treatment and complete the whole treatment program. So again, not only will support from a therapist improve the results, it will also improve whether or not people go through with all of the modules in the treatment program. So that's good. Let's see, I think, so I've talked a lot about the benefits of receiving internet-based psychological treatments. It seems very promising, won't you say? Yeah. But what about the negative effects? Could this also lead to patients experiencing adverse events during treatment? Well, we actually done a lot of studies on this topic, and it seems like a small proportion of people receiving internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy, they do deteriorate during treatment, so they fare worse. So they start out by being depressed, and then they get even more depressed after treatment. So something happens during the treatment. It's unclear if this is due to treatment, could be something else happening in their lives, but it does show us that a small proportion of people will actually deteriorate. And this graph here just shows different studies and where people deteriorate. So these are percentages. And the blue dots here, these are for the treatment conditions. So these are patients receiving internet-based treatments. And we can see that it goes from about 3% to 13%, depending on the study and condition that we have focused on here. And this is a large study with almost 3,000 patients that have received treatments for depression and anxiety disorders, pathological gambling, etc. But the interesting thing here is that the red dots, those are the patients who are on a wait list control. So they're waiting to receive treatments. And here the proportion of patient deteriorating is much, much higher. It's up to 27%. So in comparison to being on a wait list control, it's always better to receive treatment. But we should be aware that a small proportion of patients do deteriorate. And we also looked at, are there any demographics that might predict what patients will deteriorate during treatment? And there are some demographics that are related to deterioration. We can see that if you're older than the average patient, if you have a higher education, a university degree or higher, and if you're in a relationship with somebody, if you're married or you have a partner, you have lower odds of deteriorating. So it's actually a good thing to have like a higher educational degree, that you're in a relationship, and that you're a bit older. And these are usually referred to as safety factors overall. It seems to be something that's beneficial in terms of mental health in general. So that might not be surprising. But this means also that for some patients, internet-based treatments might be associated with more deterioration. And some of these patients we should be on the lookout for is younger patients, male patients, and also single patients and patients who have a lower educational degree. This is what our study shows, but also other research in this field. Now, we shouldn't, of course, deny anyone receiving internet-based treatment just because that person is younger, but we should be aware that maybe this might not be a perfect match and see we could provide treatment in another way. I should also mention that a lot of people drop out of treatments. So if you do deliver treatments online, that might not be working out for everyone. So these are just some numbers showing that some patients do drop out of treatment prematurely, so they don't get the benefits of undergoing psychological treatments via the internet. And it ranges from, in this case, 24% up to 64%, depending on what condition we're talking about. But basically, you should be aware that some patient might actually drop out and not go through with treatment. And it's important that we monitor this closely so that we can identify those patients who are on the verge of dropping out and see if can we do something else here to make sure that the patient actually sticks through the whole treatment program, or we transfer that patient to a face-to-face contact. It seems very crucial then that if you deliver a treatment via the internet, that you have a very systematic and seamless assessment procedure. Again, more support seems to be beneficial both for the results and to decrease dropouts. It seems to be important to have a structured clinical interview in the beginning of treatment, also making sure that the patient feels heard and seen and feels that he or she has the guidance that she is needing. It's also important to have a quick onboarding process, so you don't have to wait too much time between when you're assessed and when you start your treatment program. Most people want to start immediately, of course, because they feel bad. And if you're doing clinical trials, like doing research on this, we have also seen that it's very important to have a fixed starting date. So every patient starts at a very, very specific date so that they're aware of, okay, this is when my treatment starts. Again, adding to the research on support and guidance, if you have regular and personalized feedback and guidance, that seems to be very helpful. That gives us better benefits, greater results. And if we continuously monitor symptoms, like checking in on how are you doing, that also seems to be very beneficial for patients. And all of these things can be built into a treatment program delivered via the internet. So that's a good thing. Now, I've mostly covered the topic of internet-based psychological treatments. And then again, this is because we have most research on that topic. But I do want to mention something about smartphones, because I know everyone here probably has a smartphone. Yes. And it's a part of our lives nowadays. We do everything via our smartphones. We do our banking. We reach out to people. We use mapping. So if this is a part of our regular day, well, maybe we can use smartphone applications also as a way of delivering interventions for mental illnesses. And this is an example. I mentioned before that the Department of Veterans Affairs in the US have developed some of these apps. So this is an example of an application that has been developed for post-traumatic stress disorder for military vets. And this is a completely free, unguided application. Anyone can download it and use it for herself. And it contains basic psychoeducation, that is information about what PTSD is and how you can manage it. And it also covers some basic exercises that you can do. So some breathing exercises, mindfulness exercises. And it has some research support showing that, well, this is an effective intervention in itself, even though it's completely unguided. And the advantages of using applications like these is, of course, that it offers what we could call in situ engagement in close connection to important events. That means that when you, as part of treatment, need to go out and do things in your life, you can always carry with you your smartphone and this application to make sure that I'm doing the things that are important for my treatment, like exposing myself to difficult situations or putting down some notes on what is happening, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, like Michael talked about in terms of unified protocol earlier. So that's very much an advantage, because usually psychologists, we hand out paper and pencil versions of everything, and that can be quite a hassle to go around with. It also looks a bit embarrassing to write down things when you're feeling anxious. So a smartphone is much easier. So that's truly an advantage. If you also use a smartphone, and because you're carrying it around everywhere, you can also monitoring your symptoms continuously. So when I'm on the bus, I can monitor my anxiety, for instance, if I have a panic disorder and feel afraid about being on the bus. And you can also get feedback on your symptoms. So the smartphone could say to you, oh, you're very anxious at the moment. Perhaps you should do a breathing exercise, or think of this. Using a smartphone can also prompt you of when you should register stuff. Now it's even possible to, via GPS, make sure that the smartphone prompts you in a specific location. Okay, you need to register how you're feeling, what is your anxiety level. So that's also a very much of an advantage of using smartphone applications. It's also less invasive. I talked about this before. You don't have to go around with a paper and pencil version, so it's easier to use. And it's possible to integrate in a step care program or preventative program. So again, you can use smartphone application as a first step in receiving treatment with a patient. And if that's not enough, we can step up and give the person a therapist. The other advantage of using a smartphone application is, of course, that it is possible to administer the correct dosage of treatment. So maybe it's enough just to have a smartphone application and track your symptoms. You don't need to see a therapist. And you can also make sure using like regular feedback and symptom monitoring, you can see, are we making progress, or should we give you more of this treatment content, more of this treatment program? So that's good. But there are, of course, some disadvantages of using smartphone application, just like it is with internet-based treatments. First of all, there's less research on this topic. And even though internet-based psychotherapy is very beneficial, we're not sure that it can be transferred from that mean of delivering treatment to a smartphone application. It might be a bit different. So we don't have enough evidence to date to say that a lot of these smartphone applications work. It's also the problem with some of these unguided interventions is that they suffer from low adherence. So people download an application and then they stop using it. I'm sure you've experienced the same thing with other applications like gaming or whatever. So people are very keen on downloading these apps, but they stop using it. And for some of these smartphone applications, they are not developed by experts. So it could be very tricky for patients to know, is this an application that I can trust? Is it based on research evidence, or what is this? So we should be on the lookout for something that says anything about research, or there's a research team behind the development. That could be quality assurance. And very few of these smartphone applications that are out there have been tested empirically, just 4%. So that's not so good. And as I said, few users engage for a longer period of time with these smartphone applications. In one study, only 4% engage for more than 15 days. So we seem to have a sharp decline in usage. And it seems to be a very significant difference between developer and real-world rates. So when developing teams and IT persons develop these apps, they might get very nice adherence rates and it looks very good. But then when they put it out on App Store and people start using it in the real world, it doesn't really show the same results. So that's a bit tricky. And here's just to show you how people use some of these smartphone applications for mental illnesses. As you can see, there's a very sharp drop here just after a couple of days. So it seems like people want to download them and use them, but they stop using it pretty quickly. And that's bad because then they don't receive the whole treatment package. Well, does it work? Well, this is just to show you the overall effects of using smartphone applications. And this is where we compared treatments to not receiving treatments, that is being on a control condition, usually waiting for treatment. And what we can see is that we have a moderate effect showing some benefits for using smartphone applications. And in this case, it's for depression. So it seems to be, well, moderately beneficial, but not as good at internet-based treatments where you have guidance. And I think that is the key here. It works pretty well, but you should also have some guidance, some support by a therapist. This is also what we can see here. This is another study that looked at what are the factors that seem to be associated with a more positive outcome. Well, if you add guidance, if you add more support from a therapist, we do get better effects. So not only going through the treatment program on your own, you need to have some sort of support in order to get the most benefit out of these applications. It's also the case with smartphone applications that we don't necessarily use all of the features that are included. usually we just use the same type of treatment that we have been delivering for 30 or 40 years, but we put it in a smartphone application. So it's still text-based, it's very heavy, it puts a lot of workload on the patient, it seldom features any video or interactive stuff. But with a smartphone, we can use a lot of different features. We can have GPS monitoring, we can have chat-based functions, but they're seldom included, which means that we could do more using these applications. And to end my talk, I just wanted to mention something about this concept of blended treatments. In terms of both psychological treatments delivered via the internet and smartphone applications, the good thing about both of these formats is that we can use them together with face-to-face sessions. And this is sometimes referred to as blended treatments. So what it basically means is that we see a patient in the therapy room, we start up treatment, we make assessments, we have an informed consent about what we should work on, and then we can combine our face-to-face sessions with an internet-based treatment or a smartphone application. So we make sure that the patient works on his or her own, but we can track how things are going using this internet-based treatment system or the application. So it becomes an integrated, it can either be an integrated part of treatment, so maybe every other session is online and every other session is in the therapy room. But we can also have sequentially administered treatment. So we start up by having a regular face-to-face treatment, and then the patient works on her own after the treatment has been completed. Now, whether or not this is effective, it's still unclear. It's a new area of research, but it seems to work and it seems to be very acceptable by patients. So they seem to like this combination of seeing someone face-to-face and working on her own. It could also, but this is still being researched, improve adherence to treatment and prevent relapse, because the basic idea here is that the patient can work on her own and get feedback from a therapist even though we don't meet face-to-face. And that could be continued even after treatment has been completed. And it could be the case, but this is also still being researched, have an additive effect on psychotherapy. So you might have some extra benefits of using blended treatments. So it might be the case that it improves adherence and makes sure that the patient works more with the treatment content and then gets some more benefit out of the treatment. And this is just to show you how it could look like. So this is a picture of an outline of how you could work together with a patient, combining these two formats. So basically, you start out by having a session, and during this session, in this case a video meeting, you also provide some treatment content like a module. So let's say you're depressed, okay? You should start out by reading this material, and then we will continue online, so using a computer. And then the patient can work on her own from your home, for instance. We have another video meeting maybe 2 weeks later. And in this case, we go through the treatment material and maybe introduce 2 new modules, maybe relaxation or meditation or something. The patient goes home, works on her own. We can get some feedback from our therapist online. We see the patient for another video meeting, maybe 5 weeks later, introduce new modules, work together with some of the treatment content. The patient goes home, and we continue this way until the follow-up. So this is how we could combine seeing a patient face-to-face or via video conferencing and making sure that the patient works on her own. So it's the best of both worlds. However, there's still research being done here, so we don't really know the effects of this yet, but it seems to be very promising. Thank you so much.
네, 지금까지 스웨덴 웁살라 대학교 알렉산더 로젠탈 교수님이셨습니다. 스웨덴 이제 스톡홀름 대학교도 그렇고요, 웁살라 대학교도 그렇고 저희 학교에 와서 교수님들이 항상 이런 인터넷 기반 인지행동 치료에 대해서 굉장히 많은 연구를 해오셨고 그 현황에 대해서 계속 업데이트해서 알려주시고 계십니다. 그래서 오늘도 그런 내용을 중심으로 이제 관련 논문 많이 소개해 주셔서 너무 감사드리고요. 다시 한번 알렉산더 교수님한테 큰 박수 부탁드립니다. 네. 제가 우리가 좀 시간이 오래 계획했기 때문에 사실은 좀 빨리 끝내면 좋지 않을까 뭐 이런 시간에 맞춰서 딱딱딱딱 진행 먼저 강의하는 게 좋지 않을까 이런 생각이 처음에는 있었는데 한 지금으로부터 10분 정도 쉬면 어떨까 합니다. 그러니까 위로 올라가면 갈수록 화장실이 아마 덜 붐빌 거예요. 이거는 5층짜리 건물이고요. 그래서 지금 3시 1분입니다. 10분까지 쉬고 다시 모여서 세 번째 발표 듣도록 하겠습니다. 네. 우리 학교에서 오늘 참석하신 분들을 위해서 기념품을 준비했습니다. 그래서 끝까지 참석해 주시고 기념품 받아가시면 되겠습니다. 자, 아마 계속 들어오고 계실 거예요. 그래서 시작하겠습니다. 이번에는 세 번째 발표입니다. 앞선 두 분과 달리 지금 제가 소개해 드릴 분은 우리 학교에 처음 인연을 맺어서 오시는 분인데요. 바로 모니카 벌만 교수님이십니다. 교수님은 앞서 이제 프레젠테이션을 해주셨던 알렉산더 로젠탈 교수님과 같은 대학교인 웁살라 대학교 심리학과에 재직 중이시고요. 지금까지 만성 통증이나 수용 전염 치료와 관련된 많은 연구들을 수행해 오셨습니다. 교수님의 이번 발표 주제는 만성 통증에 대한 인터넷 기반 인지행동 치료 개관입니다. 그럼 교수님을 환영하는 박수로 맞이하겠습니다.
Thank you. I just need to test this to see if I know how this works. Well, yes. Thank you for inviting me and having me here. It's really an honor. And thank you, Michael and Alexander, for great presentations. And actually, it's very good that both Michael and Alexander had their presentations before me, because they have helped me defining some of the things I will talk about. Now I will not have to go into details because they already have talked about some of these things. So my research field is in behavioral medicine. Behavioral medicine is when we psychologists are needed in the somatic care. And I will talk about chronic pain, more specific on internet-based treatments for chronic pain. Pain is unfortunately very, very common. It's the most common reason for people to seek health care. And if we talk about chronic pain, that is the pain that persists for more than 3 months, that will not go away, you will live with that pain, then the prevalence is about 10 to 30% of all those that suffers from chronic pain in the world. In South Korea, I looked that up, I saw that the prevalence for chronic back pain is about 16%, which is in line with the prevalence number in the rest of the world. This is a prevalence study done here in South Korea. So this is very common. So what is chronic pain? And why are we psychologists in this field? I hope that you will understand at the end of this presentation. So chronic pain, pain is a bit like Dr. Michael was talking about anxiety. And he was saying, we need anxiety, he said. Anxiety helps us to a degree. The same is with pain. Pain do help us, because when we do feel pain, it's a signal that we need to protect ourselves. So if you would burn your hand and you feel pain, you will remove your hand from a stove or anything else. Because if you wouldn't do that, you will get really injured. And if you had like pain in another part of your body, you will say, oh, what's happening? And we all react the same. Wherever you are in the world, we have the same reaction to pain when it's acute. What we do when we have pain is this. So if I would like hurt my hand, my arm, I will move that part of my body close to my body. I will make my arm tense and will try to protect my hand or my arm because I have pain. And I will start to think, what did cause this pain? I will start to try to solve this problem. Did I do a movement I shouldn't have done? What happened? And so maybe you know, it's because I was lifting something that was very heavy. Then you will be a bit calmer. Oh, I have an explanation. I know why I have pain. I'm not as worried. And maybe I would take a medicine or massage my arm or something. These behaviors are good to have when you have acute pain. That is pain that will disappear. But these behaviors are very problematic when you have chronic pain. Because these behaviors will actually do the pain worse if you have chronic pain. But we are in a way, this is like a reflex reaction. So when you work with patients with chronic pain, you have to teach them to relate to their body in a different way. Suddenly they have to do things in another way. So we are talking about massive behavior change. That's why we psychologists are needed in this field, because medicine will not help in chronic pain, but we will. So pain is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with or resembling that associated with actual or potential tissue damage. That's the International Pain Association definition. Chronic pain, which is what we're interested in here today, is that pain that persists or recurs for longer than 3 months. Such pain often becomes the sole or predominant clinical problem for some patients. It is often multifactorial, that is, your biology is involved, psychology is involved, and social factors will contribute to the pain syndrome. So to live with pain, given that the prevalence of pain is so common, so we all know somebody that do have chronic pain, or maybe we have chronic pain ourselves. So living with pain, at the beginning, what you're most worried about is the fact that you have pain. My arm or my back or my whole body is aching. After a time, you will see that the pain is not only about your body. The pain is about that I can't do the things I used to do. I'm afraid of getting worse. I'm afraid that the pain will get worse. I can't go to the movies. I can't go to the restaurants. I start to avoid doing things because I'm afraid of the pain. So your physical function level will get lower. And of course, your ability to manage your daily task, such as cleaning your house or making food or anything. And soon enough, you will also have some sleeping problems. So people with pain will soon feel that, oh my God, my pain wakes me up and I have hard to fall asleep again. And this visual circle of being deprived of sleep and also having the ache will give you other problems. Many of the people that have pain also needs to go on sick leave and can't work. So they will lose that context of work. And this will lead to the psychological problems, such as depression. Unfortunately, depression is really prevalent in the chronic pain population. So if you work with people with depression or anxiety, you will sure meet a patient with chronic pain, because it's very common that patients with chronic pain also will have a depression disorder or an anxiety disorder. Something that we also know that a lot of chronic pain patients suffers from is that they feel that I'm not myself any longer. I don't recognize myself. I'm always irritated and I'm angry. And I feel so bad afterward because I am angry with my children, angry with my friends, and I'm always irritated. Their temper changes when you have constant pain all the time. And of course, what also happens is that a lot of patients will have lower faith on their own ability. They will not have faith on managing different things in life. The social consequences that are important to recognize is that you withdraw from your friends. You will not be as social as previously. So you will isolate yourself. And by isolating yourself, then you are making yourself vulnerable for depression. And I met patients that say, well, I still live with my family, but it's like I'm living a parallel life with my family because they do their things and I'm in my room resting all the time because I have to rest. This is the things that maybe you would do when you have acute pain, to rest, but you do not rest when you have chronic pain. That will only increase the problems. So you have social isolation. Of course, you have also economic consequences, because if you're on sick leave, your salary will probably be lower, your work capacity will be lower, and you being in absence from work, of course, will affect your economical level. The model that we often use when we talk about chronic pain is the biopsychosocial perspective. That is, this is a perspective when you have to both take into account biology, psychology, and social aspects. So you have both maybe things that do make you vulnerable. Michael was talking about that also when he talked about anxiety. You will have something that will make you vulnerable regarding how to manage living with pain. Some of the patients will already be more anxious. Those patients that are more anxious, they are in risk of developing chronic pain more often than patients that are not as anxious. And the aspects that will affect how you live with your pain is the behavioral domain. I talked about you start to avoid things, you don't want to do things. We have the aspect of your body, feeling pain. We have different thresholds for pain intensity, of course. And an interesting aspect when it comes to pain is that if we have a reason for your pain, we will be more able to actually confront that pain. So if the pain makes sense for me, I will be able to confront it. So for example, women that give birth to children, often they feel pain, right? I mean, most of us have felt pain when we did deliver the child. We know why we have that pain. That pain makes sense. So we can, I know it is very painful, but we can manage that pain. If you would to experience that kind of pain and you will not be pregnant, you will be really afraid. That doesn't make sense. Why do I have this pain? That is one of the reasons why when we have pain, we try to understand why. Why do I have pain? Why do I have a headache? Why do I have a backache or something? It's really important for us as humans to know and understand our pain. And suddenly, when you have chronic pain, that why will not get answered. You will not have an answer. It will not make sense. And that's also one of the reasons why it's so difficult to live with chronic pain. So there are a lot of challenges when it comes to pain. And one thing is that when patients say, pain destroyed my life, nothing is like it was used to be before pain, they are not talking about pain intensity. They are talking about what they would need to say is, I'm isolated, I'm depressed, I can't work the way I used to work, I don't do the things that I like to do, the social things that I do. That's what they are saying. But they will say, pain destroyed my life. And then they will maybe meet a doctor in primary care and they say, well, you know what? You have chronic pain. Just learn to live with this. And of course, that will be very hard for a patient to hear. But the truth is that no, you do not have to live being depressed, not being able to be social, not being able to work. You should be able to do all those things, even though you have pain. And that's the good news. So we have treatment. And to achieve this, what we know is that it's really important to work with all these different domains: the cognitive domain, the affective, the behavioral domain, the family, and the social context. So the treatment, the golden standard is multimodal treatments. Multimodal treatments are expensive, but that's what you give in most of the countries. In Sweden, it is the recommended treatment. I think in most countries, in the US also, I think. A multimodal treatment is that you have a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, you have a physiotherapist, you have a medical doctor, maybe you even have an occupational therapist. And all these professions will together, as a team, help the patient with chronic pain to do this behavior change I was talking about, to learn to trust his or her body again, to learn to use his or her body in a different way, to do things in a different way, but also to confront these catastrophic thoughts they have about pain, and to actually expose themselves to be without all these reactions, to be in their pain sensations. But the problem is, it's expensive, of course, and the clinics, you don't have any in Sweden. We don't have those clinics everywhere. Alexander was talking about Haparanda. Like the patients in Haparanda will have really far to get to this multimodal clinic for chronic pain treatment. So many of the people will not receive treatment. And participation often requires that they are on sick leave, because it will be like 10 weeks or 15 weeks, and they have to go whole days and meet all these different professions. Of course, it's an effective treatment. And one of the problems is that while they are in treatment, so during these weeks, when they are in the pain rehabilitation clinic, they know exactly, okay, I have the physio here next to me. I have the psychologist here who's guiding me on what I need to do. But then they come home and they find it very difficult to generalize what they have learned in the clinic. And they are often in a group. It's often group-based treatments. And the reason why it's often group-based is because it's more cost-effective. So they receive more or less the same treatment, but they might be different. They will have some different problems. So the recommendation when it comes to psychology is that when you work with chronic pain and rehabilitation, the method that is used is cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. So we have few individuals that do receive the golden standard. So we thought, why not internet? Why couldn't we offer an internet-based treatment and be able to help a lot of patients? Patients that live far away from pain clinics. Patients that say, I have a somatic disorder. I feel it's a bit embarrassing to talk with a psychologist. There's stigma associated with psychological treatment. And maybe some of them, the waiting lists are very long. So that this will also be something that could help us to reduce those waiting lists and the cost, of course. We needed to increase the accessibility to have this. So could internet work? we started to talk. Our research team with Gerhard Andersson, Per Karlbring actually, and all that, we started to talk with people in the field of chronic pain. They told us, no. Internet will work for other treatments. For those that Alexander was talking about, yes, but my goodness, chronic pain, they are difficult enough to have them in the clinic. Will you treat them through the internet? That will be very difficult because there's so much behavior change you need to work with. But we thought we should try. So yes, we did. And today we know that the results are promising. Several meta-analyses have been published that have shown that you can treat people with chronic pain through the internet. And I will like to share with you the journey that we did with our research on chronic pain. And so we did a study early, 2004, we did that study. Actually, the first study in the world that did see if we could do an internet-based treatment for chronic pain. We were a bit afraid, so we added telephone support because maybe we need to talk to them because maybe this will be too difficult. So what we wanted to do is to investigate the effects of an internet-based cognitive behavioral treatment with telephone support for patients with chronic back pain. And we also wanted to see, could we do this? And we took back pain because it's a high prevalent condition in chronic pain. We recruited by means of newspapers, articles. 100 persons showed interest that wanted to be part of this. 67 met inclusion criteria, and eventually 56 were included in the study. We assessed all the participants, and we randomly assigned to the internet-based intervention or to a waiting list control. We could see that the age on average were 44 to 45 years. The pain duration, 10 years. So the average of the pain duration for the patient was that they had had chronic pain for 10 years. We had almost 38% men and 62.5% women. The level of education was high. 57% had a university education, and 32% were on sick leave. We could see that this demographic was a bit different from the patients on a clinic. The patients on a clinic are often women and often more often on sick leave. So the outcome measures we had is the coping strategies questionnaire, the multidimensional pain inventory, hospital anxiety and depression scale. They also had a pain diary and the pain impairment relationship scale. So what we wanted to do is, will this treatment as a general CBT treatment help the participants to use coping strategies? That is new ways of handling different difficult situations in their life. But we also wanted to know, will pain interference be affected, pain intensity, and depression and anxiety, of course, and function. So we had 1 week pre-assessment, and the intervention was 6 weeks. We had applied relaxation. We actually did add multidisciplinary exercise. So we collaborated with physiotherapists and with physicians. We had cognitive reconstruction, coping diary, and we also assessed a week after. What we found is that we did have effects on some of the main scales that you should have effects when you offer treatment for patients with chronic pain. So these results were in line with the results that you will find in a clinical setting. So catastrophizing improved. That means that patients, their levels of worrying and catastrophizing about their pain, that got lower. They did this in a less degree. They felt that they had more control over their life and their pain, and they felt that they had more ability to decrease their pain. We had actually a very low dropout rate, only 9%. Maybe this is because were very new. This is, like I told you, the first study to see this. And then we had a 3 months follow-up after treatment, and that showed that the improvements were maintained. So conclusions. These findings did tell us that internet-based CBT could be an effective approach for treating disability associated with chronic pain. The limitations were the sample in the study differ in some ways from clinical population. Our participants had higher education, and we had quite a high number of men. They were recruited through newspaper ads and not from clinics. And we did not screen the participants live to see that they actually did have chronic pain. And we asked ourselves, how much did telephone support add to the effects? So we need to do another study. So then we said, okay, we will not have the telephone support. And we will recruit from a clinical setting. So we had a collaboration with the pain center at Uppsala University and the University Hospital. And what we also did is that we wanted to see, could we use an internet-based treatment to help people that went through a clinical rehabilitation, but after that rehabilitation, they still had problems. So could we add an internet-based treatment to see if they will get better effects? So we did recruit it from a clinical setting, and 72 patients wanted to participate and met the inclusion criteria. And of course, we randomized them to an internet intervention or to a moderated discussion group in the waiting list. This time we had a 8-week treatment. We did add some aspects to our former treatment. So we still had the traditional CBT techniques such as applied relaxation, cognitive strategies, and different kind of exercises. They will have to work with goals, but we also added some acceptance-based exercises. What could we see? So now, keep in mind that this is participants that had gone through a clinical rehabilitation. So they had this multidisciplinary treatment, and they still, after the treatment, still had problems. So could we, with an internet-based treatment, enhance their improvements? What we did find is that, yes, we saw that the catastrophizing reduced, like we saw in our first trial. We also saw that they were more able to change focus when they had pain. And we saw that anxiety and depression did also get better. The effect sizes in chronic pain and the chronic pain studies are often small to moderate. So that's also in line with other research. We saw also that life control, they felt more, that they have more control over their life, also improved. Affective distress, their temper was affected in a positive way, and also the impairment of pain was better after the treatment. And so what we could see, and the conclusions that we made, is that patients from the clinical setting do benefit from ICBT. And in an important difference in this study from previous studies was that participants came from a clinical setting. So these were the participants that do seek special care. But we also show with this study that ICBT can be used as a complement to the clinical rehabilitation for patients who have residual symptoms, which is maybe an important thing when it comes to internet-based treatments, that you have, this offers you different ways. The flexibility of internet-based treatment offers different ways of using. So you could add on to a clinical treatment for the patients that do not recover completely. They need more time. And instead of giving them the multidisciplinary treatment, which is very expensive, give them an internet-based treatment. Seeing this, and we were also interested that could we use internet this way, taking out all the multidisciplinary treatment, only give them a psychological treatment, nothing else, and give them acceptance and commitment therapy. Acceptance and commitment therapy through the internet. There are some challenges of you, but then we discussed different challenges of using the internet to deliver a treatment in acceptance and commitment therapy. Because ACT often is experiences-based treatment. And one of the core principles in ACT is that you don't want patients to lose themselves in the language and in the words. You want them to experience things. Could we do this on internet? We tried. So this is actually the first ACT treatment for chronic pain on internet. So we did recruit patients from the pain center. So we did stick to the clinical setting. 76 chronic pain patients were included. And this time they did not have received any multidisciplinary rehabilitation. We randomized them to either a treatment or to a moderated online discussion forum. And they were all medical investigated. So they had met a doctor who said, gave them a diagnostic. So we knew that they had significant problem with pain. So we developed a 7 section-based treatment on ACT. And we did that most of the content of this treatment you would be able to download as a MP3 recording. So you will be able to listen to this. We had mindfulness through the whole treatment. That was one of the feature that was recurrent during the whole, because mindfulness has been shown to be very important when it comes to chronic pain. And we based it on the work of Stephen Hayes. What did we find? Now we were interested on acceptance. So we had as one of the important outcome measures was a chronic pain acceptance questionnaire. So we wanted to see if the levels of acceptance did increase. And what we could see is that the engagement scale did increase. The engagement scale measures that you're more prone to do activities, even though you know that they will cause even more pain. But it's more important because they are according to your values in your life. Willingness also increased, and the total scale increased. We saw also a reduction on anxiety and depression. Effect sizes varying from small to some moderate effect sizes. But we needed to say, how about catastrophizing? Catastrophizing is something that in chronic pain, they always talk about catastrophizing. Because if patients that have chronic pain, if they have higher levels of catastrophizing, that is worrying about the pain, thinking, oh my God, what will happen if this doesn't disappear? we know that that correlates with higher intake of pain medicines. Those patients will also take more medications, but those also the patients that will be more often on sick leave. So it's an important predictor. So we saw that catastrophizing also improved, and praying and hoping, meaning that actually did decrease. They didn't pray and hope as much, and interfering also, they were less interfered, and the affective distress, their emotions were less affected by the chronic pain. Dropouts were a bit higher, 19.7%, and results were maintained at 6 months follow-up. So now we know three things with these studies. One, we know that you can treat chronic pain patients with internet-based treatment. Two, we know that you can add that to a clinical treatment. If they go through a clinical treatment and they still have problems, you could add a clinical treatment. And three, you can deliver acceptance and commitment therapy through the internet. So we know that you don't need the multidisciplinary components. We, in this treatment, only had psychological content, nothing else. And we saw that we had the effects that were in line, and in some aspects better than other multidisciplinary treatments. And it's cost effective. Then we have one other question. We wanted to try everything you can do with the internet. So we wanted to see, but hey, if we have the internet and the internet is so flexible, we should be able to tailor a treatment to give patients different modules, different content. Because this is a problem we know that chronic pain treatments have, is that they give the same content to all patients, even though we know that this is a heterogenic group. So we wanted to do a treatment where we would tailor the treatment for the patients. So we have now done, when it comes to tailoring, we have done 2 trials. My PhD student did the last one to see if we could, in the first one, so we included patients with chronic pain, but they also had anxiety and depression problems. And we did randomize them. So in the first trial that we had, when we had 52 patients, because they also came from a clinical setting, and we compared them with an active control group, 8 weeks, and the therapist did the tailoring. And the tailoring was done like this. We met the patient. No, sorry, we did a telephone screening. We used the Mini, which has structured interview material. And then they told us of what were the difficulties in their day-to-day life. And the therapist then did the tailoring. Okay, this patient needs behavioral activation. This patient also needs this, and this patient needs that. And then they received that treatment. And in the study from 2022, we had 187 participants, and we compared with a waitlist control. The treatment were between 6 to 13 modules, depending on what the patient would need. We did the tailoring here, the therapist did the tailoring, but we did in dialogue with the participants. So we used example of modules, could be behavioral activation, worry modules, stress, relaxation, sleep, and we also had some patients that had trauma. So we gave them also treatment for their trauma. And this is, I know you can't see this probably, but this is how the interventions look like. So it was, we had like 2 compulsive modules. They all had to go through the first module and the last one, but otherwise the different modules would be different for different patients depending on what their needs were. And as you can see, we have here, behavioral activation, worry, sleep, trauma, and also some things that you can't see that were also included is that some techniques also were tailored, such as relaxation and mindfulness. What did we find? Well, we did find that depression got better, function got better, that their physical function got better. We saw that acceptance, CPAC in the first trial got better, catastrophizing as well, both measured with 2 different measures. Dropouts in the first study were 17%. We did a 1-year follow-up, and we could see that the results were maintained. Gaslander, they found that also depression got better with small effects, that function also improved, that emotional strain also improved, catastrophizing, pain acceptance, quality of life got better, and in this trial we had a higher dropout rate, 30%, almost 31%. At 1-year follow-up, we saw that results were maintained. So we could see that the internet could be a way to tailor treatments for individuals with chronic pain who have psychiatric comorbidities. This is relevant since a great deal of the patients with chronic pain do have psychiatric comorbidities. So we have often the problem, I don't know if that's the case here, but in Sweden, and I know that this is also a problem in the US, is that chronic pain patients, they go to somatic care, to pain centers. But then the psychologists and the physical therapists and the physicians will say, well, this patient have too much psychiatric comorbidity. Psychiatry needs to take care of them. Then they will go to the psychiatric clinic and they will say, but this patient has chronic pain. The somatic clinic needs to take care of that. So these patients will like move from psychiatry to the somatic clinics and having a really difficult time receiving help. So this could be a way to do it, of course. And I now showed you the trials that some of the trials that we have done in our research group, but of course, a lot of people have now done a lot of studies in this field in chronic pain. So we see, like I show you, so we have different studies. And Alexander did talk a bit about this. How do you do it? He did mention that what you need to do. And all these trials that I have mentioned are guided. That is, a therapist will guide the patients. So when we did if you want to do this for a study here in South Korea, you have first to take the patient and the participant screen to see if an internet-based intervention suits him or her, exactly like Alexander was talking. It's important that this actually would suit the patient. Many times patients think, oh, I rather take the internet-based treatment because it will not take as much effort as going to the clinic. The problem is that it will take more of you. You have to have really good discipline to go through an internet-based treatment because it's up to you that you do log in and you do the exercises and so on. You have to be medically investigated. Of course, access to internet. In the case that we did, you had to know the language of the treatment content. This is an example of some of the way we did it. So we had different sections for week. We have assignments. We had information. We have audio files, movies. This is the ACT treatment. So they would have mindfulness. Like you see, they have mindfulness every week. And they will also have diffusion exercises depending. This is, like I said, an ACT treatment. And Alexander said, oh, my page doesn't look very exciting. This is even worse. This page really doesn't look very exciting. But this page is how Alexander was talking about the treatment in regular care in Uppsala. This is the platform that is used then was used in regular care. And we used the same colors as the professionals have in the hospital, blue and white. So they would recognize this. And it looked very boring, very ugly. But that did that the participants, patients said, oh, this is so ugly and boring that this is credible. This must be good because it looks like a hospital. And it was. And so they filled out the questionnaires. They have the information. This is how they will look at that. We have both the audio files and video files for different things. And they also would need to do their homework assignments. And all the communication was through the platform because it has to be a secure communication. You cannot email a patient. And this is not real patients, just so you know. So this is actually psychologists. And so this is what you would see. When you're in a clinic, you will go out to the waiting room and you will see your patients. When you're an internet therapist, you will go here and this is your patient. And you will be able to see, where is my patient? Oh, that patient is in doing the goal, so they need to work with that. And I need to actually maybe remind them of filling out some questionnaires. So you will follow the progress of your patients like this. There are pitfalls and challenges. I know that Alexander talked of several of them. I will focus a bit on chronic pain, what the pitfalls and challenges are here. Adherence, of course. It's really, really important to give information about what is expected from the participant patient. Map all the obstacles that the patient may have. You will ask them, when will you have time to log in to the treatment? When will you have time to do the exercises? You have to do applied relaxation or mindfulness. When and where will you be able to do this? So the patient needs to stop and think about this and not, oh, well, I will solve it when I start the treatment. No. You need to map that before including the person to the treatment. So they know, okay, I will do this. 2 o'clock, then I have this time when I could log in. I have a room where I could start to do my mindfulness training or my applied relaxation training. Another important thing is that be sure to be able to help participants with technical problems. Technical problems is one of the most common reasons why patients will drop out, because they get fed up. So it's important to give them help quick when it comes to technical problems. The web page should not contain too much information. It has to be easy to navigate on the web page. It shouldn't be like a gaming web page. It should be easy and really intuitive. And like I said, we often have the problem with adherence. And looking at research, we know that adherence in ICBT actually is comparable to CBT face-to-face. We have the same dropouts, but maybe on CBT you will notice that more easily. We did try to find out what would predict adherence. What's important for us to be, what do we need to observe when we have patients? So we did a study. One of my PhD students this, of course, varies depending on treatment, and I will talk about chronic pain. What we did find when it comes to adherence and chronic pain. So we saw that sick leave, depressive symptoms, and pain acceptance would actually predict lower adherence. So if you have been on sick leave for a longer time, you have really high levels of depressive symptoms would also, and if you have lower levels of pain acceptance, that will actually. But the one that is really interesting is that we saw that patients that were late on the second treatment week would also show a less level of adherence, which could mean that you need to be more active as a therapist in the beginning of the treatment. That it's important to remind them the first 3 weeks to get them through these weeks. And of course, the patients that also that they said that they didn't really thought that this will help them also had lower levels of adherence. So we know that the important things, that what I thought was important is that, okay, we need to be very observant on their activity in the beginning of an internet-based treatment. Is it for everybody? Like Alexander said, no, it's probably not for everybody. But we need to know who are the people, who are the individuals that do benefit the most for this. We don't have that information yet completely, but in Sweden, the treatment for chronic pain is implemented in regular care. So these and other studies suggest that individuals with chronic pain can be helped by CBT. That can be a complement. And maybe that people that will not seek a treatment because there's some stigma associated when you have somatic disorder to talk to a psychologist could find this as a way to receive help. We have now one PhD student that is doing a trial on stigma and chronic pain. We also have learned that there's a flexibility with internet. You can tailor studies, you can tailor treatments, and you can, of course, we chose to tailor that the therapist would tailor, but you could tailor like you could tailor like letting the patients or the participants to choose which modules they want to do. That will also be a way to tailor a treatment. Or you could tailor a treatment by assessing different important processes during the treatment, and depending on how they are moving on these processes, giving them, oh, this patient needs this, so this is what we need to do. That's something that another of our PhD students will look into that in an ACT treatment to know which content to give the person. Of course, we need still to compare to credible treatments. We have now one in the pipeline where we have compared two active treatments for fibromyalgia with over 100 participants. So, what I wanted to say besides that is that clinical psychology is really important in somatic care. And this is something that we can't forget, that we as psychologists are really needed on different somatic conditions. I talked about chronic pain, but we know that clinical psychologists are also needed in cardiology, diabetes, all that, because living with a somatic disorder will affect people's mental health. And medications will not help. So when it comes to chronic pain and they will see a doctor, the doctor will say, well, I have given you everything I can give you. I don't have more medicines to give you. And we also have another problem when it comes to medicines and chronic pain, is that unfortunately, many of the people with chronic pain will develop a substance abuse. That's also a common problem. So it's important to actually give them psychological treatment. Thank you very much.
네, 지금까지 스웨덴 웁살라 대학교 모니카 벌만 교수님이셨습니다. 만성 통증에 그 인터넷 기반 인지행동 치료를 적용한 그 사례들, 특히 수용 전염 치료를 사용한 사례들에 대해서 본인이 직접 수행한 연구를 중심으로 그 설명해 주셨습니다. 다시 한번 감사드립니다. 자, 이번에는 마지막입니다. 바로 이제 그 스웨덴과 미국에 이어서 이번에는 국내 학자의 그 발표가 있겠습니다. 바로 그 김정호 교수님이신데요. 김 교수님께서는 고려대학교 심리학과에서 박사학위를 받으셨고요. 그동안 한국심리학회장 그리고 한국건강심리학회장을 역임하셨습니다. 그리고 지금은 한국건강심리학회 산하 마음챙김 긍정심리연구회 회장을 역임 맡고 계십니다. 현재 덕성여자대학교 심리학과에 재직 중이라고 아까 말씀드렸고요. 교수님은 특히 마음챙김이라든지 긍정심리 치료와 관련된 연구를 계속 수행하고 계십니다. 지금까지 영어로 영어를 한국어로 이렇게 하느라고 우리가 통역기를 들었었는데 한국어로 들으실 수 있게 되는데요. 그래도 여전히 영어로 듣고 싶은 분은 있을 거예요. 그러면은 통역기 계속 착용하고 계시면 되겠습니다. 자, 오늘 김정호 교수님의 발표 주제는 명상, 마음챙김, 긍정심리 훈련을 통한 심리치료입니다. 큰 박수로 맞이하겠습니다.
네, 감사합니다. 오늘 정말 강행군입니다. 지금 4시간째 들어가고 있는데, 네, 감사하고요. 우리 그 강의를 시작하기 전에 칠판을 깨끗하게 지우듯이 한 1분 정도만 마음을 좀 깨끗하게 지운다는 기분으로 고요한 시간을 좀 갖도록 하겠습니다. 자, 각자 명상을 좋아하시는 분은 명상으로, 아니면 자신의 호흡을 세어본다든지, 시간은 제가 측정하겠습니다. 자, 고요한 시간 갖겠습니다. 네, 감사합니다. 제가 이쪽에서 강의를 좀 진행하려고 합니다. 아무래도 손님이신데 이제는 순서가 바뀌어서 저분들이 이제 통역기를 들어야 되는데 앞에 페이지를 좀 놔주시겠습니까? 제일 첫 번째 페이지로. 네. 네, 고맙습니다. 통역기를 쓰셔야 되니까 멀리서 오신 손님들인데 또 그래도 자막이라고 했으니까 좀 말이 잘못됐는데 스크린을 보는데 제가 여기 서 있으니까 좀 방해되실 것 같아서 제가 크지는 않습니다만 자막을 가리기에는 화면을 가리기에는 충분히 큰 것 같아서 이쪽으로 자리 좀 옮겼습니다. 그 MMPT는 여기 지금 나와 있는 것처럼 3가지 마음 기술이죠. 그 메디테이션, 마인드풀니스, 포지티브 사이콜로지. 그래서 첫 번째 연자이신 레빈이란다. 제가 그 레빈 그러면 제 옛날에 그 심리학 공부할 때 레빈을 배워서, 근데 이거는 발음이 영어 발음이니까 레윈이시죠? 레윈. 예. 레윈 박사님께서 그 익스피리언스 어보이던스 말씀 많이 주셨습니다. 그래서 여기 지금 메디테이션, 마인드풀니스, 포지티브 사이콜로지가 사실은 이것이 이제 심리 치료 상담으로 쓰일 때는 그 경험 회피, 익스피리언스 어보이던스와 굉장히 관계가 많습니다. 이것을 다스리는 좋은 기술이 마음 기술이 될 수 있겠습니다. 그리고 또 로젠탈 박사님께서 그 인터넷 여러 가지 인터벤션 보여주시면서 그 개인차 말씀도 해주셔서 흥미있었습니다. 그러니까 똑같이 여러 사람들이 도움을 받지만 몇 사람은 오히려 디스어드밴티지 말씀하셨는데 이게 또 요즘의 흐름과 맞는 것 같습니다. 아시다시피 이제 우리 심리학은 에버던스 베이스드 아닙니까? 요즘은 물론 에버던스 베이스드지만 요즘은 이제 프로세스 베이스드로 가고 있죠. 그래서 PBT, 프로세스 베이스드 테라피로 가고 있는데 여기서 핵심적인 것 중에 하나가 뭐냐면은 그 개인차에 좀 초점을 두고 개인과 다르다는 거죠. 예를 들면 그 셀프 컴패션, 자기자비의 경우에도 그것이 뭐 일반적으로 모두에게 도움된다고 할 수 생각할지 모르지만 어떤 사람한테는 그것이 좀 더 그 사람을 셀피시하게 만들 수도 있다. 이제 그런 그 주장도 있어요. 그래서 요즘에 그 PBT 흐름이 이제 구체적으로 실질적으로 이제 내담자들을 도와줄 수 있는 좋은 방법으로 가고 있는 것 같습니다. 그래서 에비던스 베이스드의 바탕을 두면서도 또 굉장히 트러스트 베이스드로 가는 지금의 흐름에 이 MMPT도 같은 그 흐름을 타고 있다. MMPT는 그 기본적으로 에비던스 베이스드고 사실 그 뒤에 좀 나와 있습니다만 이 MPPT 연구는 최근에 시작됐습니다. MPPT 자체로 해서 이제 최근에 박사 논문이 한 7개 가까이 나오고 있고요. 지금 진행되고 있고 그 중에 한 2편 정도가 그 건강심리학회제에 실렸고 이 뒤에 보면은 양이 좀 많습니다만 여러분 나중에 보시라고 좀 기니까요. 건너뛰면서 하겠습니다만 그 한 2편 정도가 보고되어 있습니다. 그래서 그 보고된 것 중에 하나 이현숙 선생하고 같이 이제 우리 지도학생이었는데 그때 박사 지도학생 그 연구는 그 MMPT를 이것도 8주 프로그램입니다. 8회기인데 8주 동안 1회기씩 해서 했는데 아시다시피 이게 2011년에 시행돼서 그 코로나 시기여가지고 그 세 집단이었는데 한 집단은 온라인 줌으로 진행했고요. 한 집단은 동영상으로 했습니다. 그래서 그 녹화된 것으로 했고요. 또 한 집단은 뭐 당연히 기대하시겠지만 그 웨이트 리스트 그 대기 통제 집단으로 했었습니다. 여기서 보니까 흥미있는 것은 당연히 그 온라인으로도 효과가 있었고요. 또 동영상 집단도 그에 못지않은 효과가 있었습니다. 그래서 앞으로는 또 동영상 이것을 잘 확보해서 만들게 되면 여러 사람들이 자유롭게 자신의 그 마음 기술을 향상시킴으로써 건강해지는 또 치유까지도 가능한 것이 되지 않을까 그런 생각이 듭니다. 앞에서 그 방금 전에 버만 교수님께서 그 크로닉 페인 얘기하시면서 그 액트를 인터넷으로 적용하셨다고 해서 좀 굉장히 저도 흥미 있었습니다. 만약에 박사님께서 흥미가 있으시다면 MMPT에 MMPT를 최초로 외국으로 수출하는 것에 대해서도 심각하게 고민할 수 있겠다는 말씀을 드릴 수 있겠습니다. 그 박사님의 벌만 박사님의 말씀에서도 좀 느끼는 게 이 MMPT랑 같은 흐름이거든요. 결국 똑같은 자극이더라도 그것을 받아들이는 안조건이라고 제가 얘기하는데 우리 마인드, 우리 마음에 있는 여러 가지 동기, 인지 이런 세팅에 따라서 해석이 달리되거든요. 아니 진짜 아주 간단한 국수 기계가 또 해봐요. 그러면 칼국수를 만드는 기계하고 아니면은 그 일반 국수를 뽑는 거하고 똑같은 밀가루 반죽 그렇지만 칼국수 뽑는 기계는 칼국수가 나오고 일반 밀가루 뽑는 국수 기계면 가는 국수가 나오잖아요. 그러니까 똑같은 밀가루 반죽이 들어가더라도 그게 그 칼국수 국수가 나올 수도 있고 가는 국수 나올 수 있잖아요. 똑같은 자극이 아닌 거죠. 그것을 처리하는 우리 처리자, 우리 자신들에 따라서 얼마든지 달라지는 건데 MMPT는 바로 그 내가 변화하는 겁니다. 그래서 저는 이건 기본적으로는 사이코 에듀케이션에서 출발했지만 최근에는 상담이나 심리치료에 적용되고 있습니다. 그 이유는 요즘의 흐름 자체가 액트도 그렇고 이런 PBT의 경우에 그 단순 공감적인 그런 반응보다는 티칭, 교육이라는 것이 강조되고 있습니다. 그래서 이 MMPT의 경우에는 그 출발이 이 그로스입니다. 우리 마음의 성장 계속 강조드리겠습니다만 치료가 따로 있는 것이 아니라 마음의 성장 과정이 치료다. 그래서 저는 이 MMPT 할 때 이 T가 테라피란 말을 쓸 수도 있지만 제가 트레인이란 말을 고집합니다. 왜냐하면 환자와 치료자를 구분하지 않고 누구나 공부할 수 있는 걸 봅니다. 그래서 저는 이것을 기본적으로는 그 마인드 스터디, 우리말로는 좀 이게 영어로 통할지 모르겠습니다. 마음 공부라 그러죠. 이 공부 그러면 이제 중국식으로 발음하면 이게 쿵푸입니다. 쿵푸, 마인드 쿵푸. 그 마인드 쿵푸를 통해서 우리가 무술을 연마하듯이 우리 마음의 기술을 연마함으로써 성장한다는 거죠. 그 성장을 하면 행복하다는 겁니다. 행복을 추구하면 행복과 멀어지지만 성장을 추구하다 보면 우리가 무술을 배우면서 우슈를 배우면서 즐거움을 느끼고 자기의 어떤 커패시티가 증가하는 것처럼 우리가 이 마인드 스킬을 쿵푸 하게 되면 우리가 성장하면서 그 결과 해피하다는 거죠. 행복은 추구하면 행복과 멀어집니다. 그림자를 쫓아가면 영원히 그림자를 쫓을 수밖에 없어요. 우리는 그림자는 잡을 수가 없습니다. 내가 멈추면 그림자가 내 옆에 붙어 있게 되겠죠. 그래서 이 성장이 핵심입니다. 그래서 성장을 통한 행복, 그냥 행복은 그것은 난센스라고 생각이 됩니다. 그래서 핵심이 그 마인드 에듀케이션 이것은 우리 마음의 그러면 이 마인드 스터디에서 핵심이 뭐냐면은 결국은 이게 지금 양이 많습니다. 기본 요거 한마디만 더 말씀드리고 할게요. 여기 뭐 트루 에고이스트란 말이 나왔는데 우리 영어로 이게 번역이 될지 모르겠습니다만 우리말로 하면 이기적, 영어로 셀피시, 뭐 에고이스트, 셀피시라고 하는데 그 셀프, 이라고 하는 것이 이롭게 한다는 거잖아요. 베너핏. 그다음에 기가 뭡니까? 셀프잖아요. 그러니까 이기라는 말은 말 그대로 보면 글자 그대로 보면 나쁜 뜻이 아니에요. 나를 이롭게 하는 거예요. 중요한 것은 우리가 그만큼 현명하냐, 와이즈하냐는 거죠. 자기 딴에는 자기를 이익되게 한다 그러는데 남들한테 손가락질 받아요. 셀피시하다고. 그 사람은 진정한 이기주의자는 아니에요. 왜? 자기를 손가락질 받는 게 그 사람한테 이로운 일이 될 수 없잖아요. 어리석은 사람이죠. 그러니까 이 마음 공부라고 하는 것은 그 자신도 그렇고 내담자로 하여금 정말 자기 자신을 이롭게 할 수 있도록 도와주고 마음 공부를 통해서 내 마음이 어떻게 작동하고 나라는 것이 누구인지 Who am I? What am I에 대해서 이것은 평생 과업이죠. 평생의 프로젝트죠. 내가 누구인가에 대해서 끊임없이 공부해 가면서 자신의 인지, 동기, 정서 이런 것들에 대해서 이해해 가면서 그것을 또 연마함으로써 성장할 수 있다는 거. 그러면 행복은 따라오는 거고요. 그 점을 강조해서 이 MMPT에서는 지혜, 이런 그 마음 공부를 통한 지혜가 향상되고 그것이 성장 과정이다. 그래서 이걸 도식으로 표현하면 이렇게 됩니다. 마음 공부는 기본적으로 두 가지입니다. 사이코 에듀케이션인데 마인드 나리지에 대해서 공부하는 거. 여러분이 이제 상담자로서 내담자를 교육한다면 이 부분에 대해서 공부해야 됩니다. 이거 부분이 아까 제가 지금 조금 빼먹었는데 제가 출발하느라고 조금 이게 국제회의라서 긴장했나 봐요. 좀 광고를 해야 되는데 제가 유튜버입니다. 여기 MMPT 마음 공부라고 유튜버입니다. 잘하면 오늘 구독자가 많이 늘 것 같아요. 여기 들어가시면은 여러 가지 동영상이 준비되어 있습니다. 그러니까 아직은 제가 이번 학기가 제가 이제 은퇴하는 학기입니다. 그래서 이제 준비가 많이 안 됐습니다만 이제 은퇴하면 좀 시간이 많으면 동영상을 좀 많이 만들어 놓겠습니다. 그렇게 되면은 여러분들이 이런 내용을 이제 동영상을 통해서 쉽게 할 수 있고 여러분이 MMPT로 논문을 쓰실 수도 있습니다. 이것을 그 동영상을 가지고 우리 제자가 그 8주 동영상 가지고 연구를 했거든요. 동영상으로도 효과가 나타났거든요. 그러니까 여러분들도 여기 있는 동영상을 활용하셔서 그 대기통제 집단하고 하게 되면은 연구를 하실 수가 있습니다. 그때 우리 제자랑 했던 연구는 그 중년 여성의 불안이었습니다. 중년 여성의. 그 여러분들은 여러분 나름대로 관심 있는 영역에 대해서 MMPT를 적용하시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 만약에 필요하시다면 그 앞에 나와 있는 제 이메일 주소로 연락하시면 도움을 드리겠습니다. MMPT를 연구하겠다는데 제가 왜 안 돕겠습니까? 그렇죠? 네. 그래서 이 네 가지인데요. 마음나리 지식은 이것이 제가 볼 때는 심리학도라면은 대부분 아는 내용입니다. 물론 여기 마인드 소사이티 티오리 같은 경우에는 조금 동의하지 않을 분이 있을지 모르지만 여기 있는 내용들은 특히 구성주의, 컨스트럭티비즘 같은 거, 또 인포메이션 프로세싱 커패시티 리미테이션은 심리학 개론을 공부한 사람이면 다 알죠. 거기다가 이제 제가 새롭게 만든 거는 동기 상태 이론 하고 그다음에 마인드 소사이티 티오리. 마음은 사회다. 사회라고 하는 것은 구성원이 있죠. 2명 이상의 구성원이 있죠. 나들, 아이즈. 나는 하나가 아니라 복수다. 여러 나들이 산다. 내가 하나라고 하는 것도 어삼프션이거든요. 그런데 내가 하나라고 하는 어삼프션보다 내가 복수라고 하는 어삼프션이 우리를 매우 건강하게 해줍니다. 우리의 심리적 유연성을, psychological flexibility를 높여줍니다. 이거는 제가 시간상 더 깊게 얘기 못하지만 동영상이 관심 있는 분들이 있으니까 참조하셔도 되겠습니다. 그래서 이걸로 요약될 수 있고요. 그 다음에 지금 여기 나와 있는 이 세 가지 마인드 스킬, 이게 이제 우리 MMPT의 이름이기도 하죠. 요 세 가지를 또 간단하게 표현하면은 트라이앵글로 표현할 수 있습니다. 이게 안타깝게도 이 메디테이션과 마인드풀니스가 이 연구하는 분들이 구분이 안 돼 쓰고 있어요. 메디테이션과 마인드풀니스는 관계가 있지만 다른 개념입니다. 뭐 아쉽게도 그 카바찐, 그 여러분 잘 아는 MBSR을 창시한 카바찐 박사의 그 마인드풀리스 정의에 보면은 이게 구분이 안 돼 있어요. 왜냐하면 그분 정의에는 저는 이 메디테이션은 베어 어텐션이고요. 이 둘 다 어텐션 트레이닝인데 마인드풀리스는 베어 메타 어텐션이에요. 근데 카바틴 박사의 마인드풀리스 정의를 보게 되면 베어 메타 어텐션이고 베어 메타하고 구분이 없어요. 그냥 현재, present moment, non-judgmental. 그러니까 비판단적이라는 것이 베어거든요. 베어 어텐션인데 베어 어텐션을 그냥 하는 게 있고 나를 보는 베어 어텐션을 하게 되면 그거는 베어 메타 어텐션이에요. 그래서 이 제 MMPT의 장점이 특징이기도 하고 장점이라고 한다면은 명상과 마음 챙김을 구분할 수 있다는 거. 그리고 그 두 가지를 함께 하는 거. 이 두 가지를 함께 하는 게 마음 챙김 명상입니다. 마인드풀리스 메디테이션, 그러니까 세 개가 있죠. 이거는 동영상이 있습니다. 따로 제가 중요하기 때문에 따로 뽑아놨어요. 찾으실 때 명상, 마음 챙김 명상의 구분. 이 세 가지를 제가 구분한 한 20분짜리 동영상이 있으니까 그 참고하셔도 좋겠습니다. 그래서 간단하게 말씀드리면 메디테이션은 마음을 쉬는 기술입니다. 명상은 베어 텐션이에요. 우리의 탑다운을 멈추는 거예요. 베어 텐션이라는 것은 바텀업 프로세싱입니다. 탑다운을 멈추는 거예요. 쉬는 거예요. 비우는 거예요. 그러면 마인드풀리스는 뭐냐? 보는 거예요. observe 하는 거예요. 무엇을? 나를 있는 그대로 난쩌지만하게 as it is. 그래서 좀 다른 개념이고요. 그 다음에 또 하나가 뭐냐면은 이 포지티브 사이콜로지라고 제가 말씀드린 이 우리 마음을 쉬기만 하면 안 되고 잘 써야 돼요. 이 쓰는 것이 긍정 심리라고 표현되는 마인드 스킬입니다. 그래서 쉽게 말하면 쉼, 봄, 씀, 영어로 짧게 하면 ROU 모델입니다. ROU, Resting, Observing, Using. 그래서 ROU 모델이라고도 할 수 있습니다. 그래서 이 세 가지가 MMPT의 핵심적인 마음 기술이다. 이거를 배우면 성장이라고 합니다. 성장의 오퍼레이셔널 데피니션은 아까 말씀드린 마인드 나리지에 깊게 이해하는 거, 그 다음에 이 마인드 스킬의 숙달도가 높아지는 거, 그게 그 성장의 그 마음 성장의 오퍼레이셔널 데피니션이라고 할 수 있습니다. 그래서 이것하고 그러면은 이 심리 치료는 어떤 관계 있냐면은 앞에서도 우리 레빈 박사님께서 그 트랜스 다이그노스틱 어프로치 얘기하시지 않습니까? 이 트랜스 다이그노스틱 어프로치하고 PBT랑 거의 같은 흐름이라고 보시면 돼요. PBT가 추구하는 것도 마찬가지로 우리가 심리학자가 정신과 의사보다 강한 점이 뭐냐면은 이 심리적 정보 처리의 기제를 다루고 그것을 그 에버던스를 추적할 수 있다는 거거든요. 그냥 DSM 체계처럼 그것이 분류하는 게 아니라 그 내용을 들어갈 수가 없어요. 그렇게 되면 증상의 이름은 나왔지만 그 so what? 근데 그 과정, 프로세스 여기서 지금 제가 초점을 둔 게 뭐냐면 이 루머네이션하고 제가 너무 빨리 나왔나요? 여기 지금 룸을 뒤에 할 텐데요. 지금 MMPT가 이 사이코 세라피와의 관계에서는 여기 지금 제가 여기 조금 그 큰 얘기인데요. MCBT라는 말을 제가 씁니다. CBT는 다 아시죠? 그 이제 비헤이비어 테라피, 코그니티브 비헤이비어 테라피, 요즘은 제3단계라고 그러잖아요. 제3단계에는 이름이 없어요. 각자 춘추 뭐 전국 시대처럼 따로따로 뭐 액트, DBT, MBCT 등이 있지 않습니까? 저는 이거를 MBCT라고 부를 때 통합될 수 있다고 생각해요. 저는 참 의문스러운 게 동기를 안 다루고 어떻게 증상을 말하느냐. 우리의 그 증상 또 스트레스라고 하는 것은 동기의 상태이기 때문에 그래서 지금 자세히 다루기는 어려운데요. 여기서 일단은 안팎합지도하고 그 모티베이셔널 스테이트 티오리 아까 말씀드린 마음 지식이 하나요. 그거를 좀 설명을 드리겠습니다. 여기 지금 제가 이 MCBT라고 부르게 되는 건 뭐냐면 동기가 핵심이라고 보는 거예요. 동기가. 그래서 그러면 그 모스트라고 부르는 동기 상태 이론, 모티베이셔널 스테이트 티오리가 MCBT의 근간을 이루어주는데 그 모스트란 뭐냐면 제가 이 스트레스 연구하고 웰빙 연구를 하다 보니까 이 두 개가 따로 돼 있어요. 그래서 스트레스 연구의 대표 주자인 라자로스 돌아가셨죠. 라자로스는 디너를 거의 언급하지 않아요. 또 웰빙 연구하는 디너는 이 스트레스 연구하는 라자로스를 거의 언급하지 않아요. 두 분 다 돌아가셨습니다만. 근데 제가 보니까 이 둘을 따로 다루면 안 된다는 거예요. 스트레스나 웰빙이나 둘 다 뭐냐? 동기의 상태다. 여기서 동기라는 말은 조금 이제 사람마다 다를 수 있어요. 우리가 동기라는 말을 쓰기도 하고 욕구라는 말을 쓰기도 하고 욕망이라는 말을 쓰기도 하고 욕심이라는 말을 쓰기도 하고 의도라는 말을 쓰기도 하고 dream, 꿈, 네 꿈이 뭐냐? 꿈을 이렇게 얘기하기도 해요. 이 용어는 다르지만 이 모든 것은 뭐냐면 핵심인 goal이 있어요. 목표 상태가 있습니다. 그 다음에 그것을 이루고자 하는, 유지하고자 하는 혹은 그러한 드라이빙 포스, 추동력, 소망, 이 에너지 개념이죠. 에너지 개념. 요 두 가지가 있으면 모두 한마디로 동기라고 부르자. 심리학이 어려운 이유가 일반인들이 사용하는 용어로 과학을 하게 되기 때문에 심리학자의 어려움이 있어요. 물리학자는 그런 어려움이 없지만. 그래서 그 다양한 용어들을 동기라는 한마디로 요약하겠습니다. 그러니까 또 심리학자들도 다 달라요, 정의가. 근데 저는 어떻게 한다고요? 오퍼레이션을 그것이 goal이 있고 그것을 유지하거나 이루고자 하는 추동력, 에너지 개념이 있다면 그건 모티베이션을 하겠다. 그래서 우리의 스트레스는 한마디로 동기 상태다. 동기가 좌절된 상태, 오아엔드 동기 좌절이 예상되는 상태입니다. 이 부분이 특히 인간적입니다. 동물에선 잘 발견되지 않는 부분이지만 우리 인간한테 특히 이 부분이 아주 중요합니다. 또 하나 웰빙, 우리의 웰빙은 뭐냐면 동기 충족이고요. 동기 충족 예상도 있습니다. 근데 대부분의 사람들은 동기 좌절 예상은 많이 하는데 동기 충족 예상하는 사람 많지 않습니다. 그래서 많은 사람들이 조금 힘들어하는 게 이것보다는 이거, 그러니까 동기 충족 예상보다는 동기 좌절 예상을 좀 많이 하기 때문에 그런 이유로 볼 수 있습니다. 이것도 그러니까 훈련을 통해서 해야죠. 그러니까 이 마인드 스킬을 배운다, 이 마음 공부를 한다는 것은 결국은 다른 말로 하면 어텐션 훈련이에요. 어텐션을 운영하는, 어텐션을 우리가 쓰는 능력, 그게 마인드 쿵푸의 핵심으로 볼 수 있어요. 내가 어텐션을 얼마나 내 마음대로 쓸 수 있느냐 볼 수 있죠. 그런 어텐션을 통해서 결국은 우리 내부의 모티베이션, 카그니션 이런 것들이 또 비헤이비어가 변화합니다. 그래서 이 모티베이션의 상태, 이것이 이제 중요한 이유가 앞에서 제가 이 그 증상 얘기하면서 뒤에 나오는군요. 다시 다루겠습니다만 그 증상이라고 하는 것은 스트레스가 강하게 한 번에 일어나거나 아니면 그렇게 강하지는 않더라도 만성적으로 스트레스가 누적되면 그게 심리적인 증상으로 나타나는 거거든요. 그러니까 결국은 동기를 언급하지 않으면 증상을 얘기할 수가 없다. 그래서 그 사람 내담자가 먼저 온다면 우리 제자들은 접근하는 게 동기 탐색을 먼저 해요. 왜냐하면 그 사람의 증상은 동기에서 오는 거기 때문에. 물론 동기 탐색하는 분들이 또 다른 분이 있겠지만 다른 점이 있다면 MMPT에서의 상담, MMPT의 심리치료에서는 건강한 동기에 초점을 둡니다. 망가진 동기보다는 건강한 동기에 초점을 둡니다. 그거는 짧은 시간에 많은 거라서 어려움이 있습니다만 뒤에 좀 다루도록 하고요. 또 하나 그 중요한 MMPT가 바탕을 두는 게 이 구성주의죠. 이거는 앞에서 MMPT의 그 마음지식에도 들어가죠. 그리고 MCBT라고 하는 동기 인지 행동 치료, 모티베이셔널 커그니티브 비헤이비어 테라피에서도 이 컨스트럭티비즘은 매우 중요합니다. 결국은 우리가 경험하는 것은 아까 국수 뽑는 얘기도 했습니다만 우리의 경험이라고 하는 것은 크게 나누면 스트레스와 여기 좀 번역이 좀 잘못됐는데 이거 디플로 제가 돌리고 수정했는데 이거 수정이 안 됐군요. 웰빙으로 고치겠습니다. 네, 그래서 그 스트레스와 웰빙이라고 하는 것이 우리의 익스피리언스인데 이것은 만들어지는 거다. 그러니까 이런 동기 상태 이론이나 구성주의가 뭐 대놓고 강의하기는 힘들겠습니다만 좀 준비된 내담자라면 차분차분하게 강의해 나가면은 그분들이 자기를 보는 관이 달라져요. 관. 우리말로 관 그럼 뭘까요? 관점. 영어로 하면 퍼스펙티브일까요? 그런 눈이 바뀌는 거예요. 그러니까 우리 내면의 동기와 인지가 이게 컴플렉스를 이루는데 동기, 인지, 컴플렉스가 뒤에 말씀드리겠습니다만 그게 하나하나가 다 I예요. I. 그것들이 내 마음에서 하나하나의 구성원으로 살고 있어요. 그러니까 우리가 대한민국 그러면 하나죠. 대한민국 그러면 하나잖아요. 그러나 대한민국에 얼마나 많은 집단이 있고 얼마나 많은 사람들이 삽니까? 마찬가지입니다. 여러분이 이름으로 아무개라고 하지만 마치 코리아 그러면 하나지만 실제로 그 코리아 안에 얼마나 많은 사람이 삽니까? 그러니까 우리 내면에 굉장히 많은 나들이 있는데 그 나들은 이런 동기인지의 컴플렉스들이고 이것들은 그냥 두면 동기인지일 뿐이에요. 근데 무슨 이유인지 모르지만 우리가 동일시라는 걸 해요. 아이덴티피케이션. 그때 나가 됩니다. 이게 불교의 무아랑 연결되는데요. 저는 불교의 무아와 반대로 내가 많다라고 설명합니다. 불교에서는 없다라고 설명합니다. 근데 둘이 다르지 않아요. 왜냐하면 우리가 마인드풀리스로 그 라이트를 비추게 되면 해체됩니다. 그러면 카그니션, 모티베이션, 이모션 등이 센세이션 등이 분리돼요. 그럼 나라고 부를 게 없어요. 근데 저는 무아를 설명하지 않고 반대를 설명합니다. 왜냐하면 그게 더 유익하니까요. 마음을 하나로 보기보다는 여럿이라고 어삼프션하는 게 굉장히 우리의 심리적 유연성에 도움이 됩니다. 그 하나하나가 왠지 모르지만 우리가 동일시를 해요. 그것이 왜 나일까요? 그것도 굉장히 그 철학적으로 중요한 어떤 영성 공부에 중요한 게 될 수 있습니다. 왜 동기인지를 나라고 믿을까요? 대부분은 레이턴트 상태에 있다가 내가 그것이 동일시가 일어날 때 많은 경우에 자동화되어 있어요. 내가 동일시하는지도 몰라요. 그래서 마음챙김 훈련은 그거를 디태치 시켜줍니다. 분리시켜주면서. 그러나 저는 그러한 것에 머물지 말고 나를 써라. 우리 긍정심리 쓴다. 유징하는 거. 그런 다양한 동기인지의 나들을 사용하는 거. 그것을 더 강조하는 편입니다. 네, 그래서 이 두 가지로 해서 MCBT를 근간을 이루는데요. 조금 자세한 거는 이게 좀 읽어보시면 또 여러분한테 우리말로 되어 있으니까요. 조금 제가 고치긴 했습니다만 거의 비슷할 겁니다. 그래서 그거를 보여드리고요. 그래서 핵심적으로 요거는 뭐냐면은 그동안에 기존에 있는 여러 가지 무슨 치료 많은 인터벤션들이 있잖아요. 그것들을 요약하면 이 네 가지로 요약된다. 동기상태론과 관련된 건데요. 하나는 그 치료법이 뭐든 간에 그것이 DBT의 어떤 다양한 치료법이든 액트의 다양한 치료법이든 그 밑에 여러 가지 인터벤션들이 있는데 그것들을 보게 되면 크게 네 가지라는 거예요. 하나는 동기의 상태, 스트레스를 일으킨 동기의 상태를 변화시키는 기법이고요. 또 하나는 스트레스의 동기 자체를 변화시키는 거예요. 그러니까 그 사람의 동기를 놔두고 예를 들면 인지치료에서 자꾸 생각을 바꿔가지고 네 생각이 맞지 않아. 네가 그렇게 해석하기 때문에 동기 좌절로 네가 보이는 거야. 이 해석을 바꿔봐. 그러면 동기 좌절이 아닌데 이런 방식이죠. 그렇다면 여기 이 3번의 경우에는 모티베이션 이셀프하고 스트레스는 동기 자체를 변화시키는 거예요. 예를 들면 다른 사람들이 너를 그러면 사랑하지 않으면 어떤데? 동기 자체를 그러니까 예를 들어서 지나가는데 인사를 했는데 하이 했는데 인사를 안 받고 지나갔어요. 그러니까 보통 사람은 그런가 보다 해. 근데 좀 스트레스에 취약한 사람은 하루 종일 생각해요. 뒤에 나오겠습니다만 이게 프로세스, PBT에서 프로세스, 중요한 프로세스가 루모네이션이거든요. 계속 루모네이트해요. 일하다 말고 왜 인사 안 받았지? 다음 인사 고과 때 나를 어떻게 잘못할 건가? 또 하다가 또 점심 때 또 문득 또 떠오르면 또 왜 인사 안 받았지? 나를 무시하는 건가? 그래서 화가 났다가 또 어떤 때는 내가 그렇게 또 못난 인간인가? 그래서 또 이렇게 또 캄다운 이게 좀 디프레스 됐다가 이게 좀 널뛰는 이런 거는 그 동기가 다른 사람한테 인정받으려는 그런 동기거든요. 그러면 한편으로 해서는 CBT를 보면 그거 네가 잘못 본 거야. 그게 얼마나 맞겠어? 인지를 바꾸는 거라면 이게 3번 같은 경우에는 어떤데 그 동기 자체를 다뤄주는 거예요. 그거를. 저는 어떤 때 이런 말을 써요. 영어로 번역이 잘 될지 모르겠습니다만 너 인정거지 되려고 그러냐? 인정거지 되지 마라. 그러면 사람들이 확 정신 차려요. 사람들이 남을 배려한다라고 착각을 하는데 배려하는 게 아니라 너 인정거지야. 너 남을 배려한다고 생각하지 착하다고 생각하지 너 인정거지야. 인정거지. 이런 말을 해주면 그 사람들이 확 깨어나기도 해요. 그게 그 사람의 내면을 바꿔주는 하나의 방법이고 그게 뒤에 설명하는 긍정심리 기법 중에 웰빙 인지 기법이에요. 그 웰빙 인지 기법에서 이제 그 생각을 바꾼다기보다는 다른 퍼스펙티브, 다르게 보는 조망, 다르게 보는 눈을 제공합니다. 그러니까 생각을 바꾸려고 애쓰는 게 아니라 얼핏 보면 뒤에 나오는 웰빙 인지 기법하고 그 CBT에서의 그 리스트럭처링 하는 거랑 비슷해 보일지 모르지만 좀 다릅니다. 그걸 고치려고 하지 않아요. 고치려고 하지 않고 그냥 새로운 퍼스펙티브를 줍니다. 그래서 그 퍼스펙티브를 공부하는 사이에 자신의 동기가 변화해요. 그러니까 이 사람이 진짜 못 보고 지나갔냐, 보고 지나갔냐, 뭐 이거를 따질 필요가 없어요. 그런 거는 이러한 그 스테이트 모드 여기에 해당되는 거고, 요 3번인 게 있고, 그 다음에 제가 초점을 두는 것은 요 2번, 4번입니다. 2번, 4번은 그 사람의 증상의 문제에 초점을 두는 게 아니라 여전히 남아있는 healthy motivations, 여전히 그 사람에게 있는 건강한 동기를 찾습니다. 그리고 그거를 추구하도록 돕습니다. 그래서 그 상태를 추구하도록 하는 게 있고요. 그 다음에 새로운 동기를 발굴해주고 확립해주고 추구하도록 도와주는 거, 일종의 그 코치 역할을 하는 거예요. 상담자나 치료자는 그걸 도와주는 코치 역할, 선생님 역할을 하면 됩니다. 그리고 요거에 초점을 둔다는 얘기는 제가 그 5개 원그림이 있습니다. 5개 원그림 그릴 때 다시 한번 설명드리겠습니다. 요거는 이제 제가 그려본 건데요. 이게 모티베이션을 핵심으로 해가지고 이 5가지가 서로 굉장히 상호작용이 밀접합니다. 그림을 그려봤어요. 이거를 실제는 이게 같이 섞여 있겠습니다만 우리가 그럼 나눠보면 이렇게 모티베이션, 카그니션, 센세이션, 이모션, 비헤이비어 나눠볼 수 있고요. 여기서는 뭐 나름대로 인지가 동기에, 동기가 인지에 서로 뭐 그 인지와 그 정서 간의, 이모션 간의 그 영향, 이거를 얘기하고 있습니다. 특히 이제 CBT에서는 인지를 변화해서 이모션을 바꾸려고 한다면, 요즘은 말하자면 이제 행동 활성화도 그렇고 뒤에 다루는 이제 제가 MMPT에서는 웰빙 행동 기법이 있어요. 웰빙 행동 기법에서는 이 정서를 바꿔줍니다. 행동을 바꿔줌으로 해서 정서를 바꿔주면 그때 인지가 바뀌어요. 인지를 생자로 바꾸려고 하게 되면 저항이 생길 수 있는데 자연스럽게 웰빙 행동을 통해서 정서가 바뀌면 인지가 바뀝니다. 그거는 여러분의 그 바바라 프레데릭슨의 그 BBT, Broaden and Build Theory, 그 확장 확립 이론을 보시면 그 근거를 충분히 아실 수 있을 겁니다. 네, 그래서 제가 이것이 이제 제가 강조하는 부분인데요. 아까 그 좌절된 동기. 지금 증상이랑은 뭐라고요? 스트레스가 강화된 거예요. 확장된 거예요. 그러면 동기 좌절 예상이라고 했습니다. 그 동기에 초점 두지 말고 여전히 그 사람에게 있는 건강한 동기를 찾으라는 거예요. 지금 많은 경우에 내담자도 그렇고 심지어 상담자나 심리치료하는 사람도 여기에 포커스 두는 경우가 많아요. 그 사람의 트라우마라든지 그 사람의 그 문제된다고 하는 거, 그 사람의 열등감이라든지 그 사람의 뭐 안 좋은 기억이라든지 이런 거에 초점을 두고 이걸 고치려고 해요. 근데 앞에서 제가 지금 잠깐 말씀드렸던 4개의 그 마음 지식 중에 동기상태 이론, 구성주의, 정보 처리 용량 제한성이 있죠. 쉽게 말하면 여러분 워킹 메모리 사이즈가 7 플러스 마이너스 2라고 그러잖아요. 이게 작아요. 이게 작기 때문에 공정한 정보 처리를 못해. 그래서 저는 이것이 인간에게 원죄가 있다면 이게 원죄다. 그래서 우리가 공정한 정보 처리를 못해. 남편하고 부부싸움 할 때 남편이 잘해준 게 떠오르나요? 안 떠올라요. 기분 일치성 효과, 무드 칸그런스 이펙트 때문에 화가 났을 때는 화가 관련된 기억들이 잘 떠올라요. 근데 우리의 워킹 메모리 작잖아요. 그러면 남편과의 얼마나 많은 기억들을 갖고 있습니까? 그 중에 일부 지금 기분에 컨그루언트한 그 기억들만 떠오른단 말이에요. 그러니까 남편한테 못할 말을 하고 후회할 수도 있죠, 나중에. 그러니까 그런 그 정보 처리 용량 제한성의 희생자가 되지 마라. 근데 이 정보 처리 용량 제한성이라는 게 원죄와 같은 측면도 있지만 복음의 측면이 있다. 복음과 같다. 왜냐하면 작기 때문에 매니지할 수가 있는 거예요. 그래서 이 작기 때문에 이 우리 마음의 공간에, 의식 공간에, 혹은 비유하자면 우리 마인드 소사이어티는 무한히 크지만 마인드 소사이어티의 그 스테이지, 무대는 작다는 거예요. 이 작은 거를 쓸 수가 있어. 작기 때문에 우리가. 그게 복음과 같은 뉴스예요. 그래서 우리의 주의가 제로성 관계에 있기 때문에 이 부정적인 거 갖고 자꾸 씨름을 하게 되면은 일로 내가 알게 모르게 이 건강한 애들한테는 투자가 안 돼. 나의 정신 자원이 건강한 애들한테는 투자가 안 돼. 왜? 일루가 있으니까, 이 문제에. 그러니까 결국은 건강한 나들은 시들어가게 되고, 얘는 원치 않게도 이 unhealthy mind 부분은 이렇게 커지는 거예요. 오히려 건강한 부분은 점점 더 위축되겠죠. 왜? 제로성 관계예요. 정보 처리 용량이 제한되어 있기 때문에. 그거를 잘 알면 아까 말씀드린 대로 지혜로운 이기주의자가 되라. 너 나름대로는 다 자기 이익 보려고 하고 손해 안 보려고 하는데 왜 이렇게 손해보는 바보짓 하냐. 현명하게 살자, 지혜롭자 하는 말을 강조할 수 있겠죠. 그래서 이러한 교육을 통해서 이 5개 원그림도 우리 제자들이 또 많이 활용하고 또 호응이 좋은 것 같아요. 그래서 이 그림을 통해서도 교육이 마음 공부가 좀 잘 되는 것 같아요. 그래서 이러지 말고 투자를 여기다 투자해라. 이 건강한 마음에 투자해라. 건강한 마음에 투자하면 그 불건강한 마음 그대로 있어요. 내 트라우마, 나의 열등감, 나의 부족한 부분, 어머니, 아버지가 어린 시절에 이혼을 했네, 뭐 내가 어린 시절에 무슨 왕따 경험이 있네, 학교 폭력 경험이 있네, whatever. 무엇이든 간에 여전히 있어요. 근데 그것이 내 마음 사회에서, 내 마인드 사회에서 작용하는 힘은 매우 줄어 있습니다. 그러니까 여러분들이 제가 MCBT라고 할 때는 바로 이런 부분이 강조되는 거예요. 긍정심정이 강조돼요. 근데 재미있게도 요즘 PBT를 보니까 PBT에 설명해 보게 되면 이 입장이 나와요. PBT에서 강조하는 게 뭐라고 그러냐면 신드롬 리덕션이 아니라 웰빙 인핸스먼트란 말이 나옵니다. 그래서 최근의 흐름이 제가 하고 있는 이 MMPT 이 흐름하고 같구나. 이 흐름이. 그래서 지금 PBT에서도 분명하게 옹, 헤이스 그런 사람들이 쓴 2020년 논문을 보게 되면 명확하게 제가 인용했습니다만 나와 있습니다. 신드롬 리덕션이 아니라 웰빙 인핸스먼트에 관심이 있다는 거죠. 그래서 여러분들도 내담자를 치료할 때, 상담할 때 그 문제에 너무 집착하지 마시고 그 사람이 여전히 남아있는 지금 말하자면 깨진, 지금 좌절된 혹은 좌절이 예상되고 있는 그 동기가 아니라 여전히 남아있는 그 사람의 건강한 동기를 찾고 같이 찾고 그것을 자꾸 숙제를 내주고 실천하게 해서 거기서 리인포스먼트를 받을 수 있게 그 웰빙 행동하고 거기서 자기 건강한 동기를 충족하는 게 웰빙이기 때문에 웰빙을 하게 되면 리인포스먼트를 받죠. 그 동양말로 하게 되면 진기예요. 동양에서는 진기가 있는 곳에 사기가 살 수 없다 그러잖아요. 사기를 뽑아내려고 애쓰는 게 아니라 진기를 채워주면 사기는 밀려나는 거예요. 그러니까 웰빙의 경험을 많이 하면은 모르는 사이에 눈이 바뀌어요. 우리 내면의 동기와 인지가 변화해요. 그러면 나들이 변화해요. 불건강한 나보다 건강한 나들이 점점 힘이 생겨요. 이 마인드 스테이지에 올라오는 애들이 건강한 애들이 올라올 확률이 높아져요. 그 전에 여전히 이제 그 사람이 20살이라면 20년 동안 이 불건강한 나들이 자꾸 이 스테이지에 올라왔거든. 걔네들 싸우지 마시고 그냥 건강한 나를 올리세요. 건강한 나를 올리세요. 여러 가지 메디테이션, 마인드풀니스 또 여러 가지 그 웰빙 행동을 하시고 또 자비, 그 러빙 카인드니스라든지 컴패션 저는 그걸 합해서 그 외국에는 그 우리의 자비라는 표현이 없어요. 따로따로 쓰는데 그 자비라는 표현이 필요하다는 걸 제가 올해 초에 그 논문으로 발표를 했는데 합성어를 만들면 러빙 컴패션이라는 말을 제가 씁니다. 그 러빙 컴패션을 늘리는 거 그거 역시 내 안에 따뜻한 나, 그 건강한 나, 관계 동기라는 것만큼 인간을 행복하게 하는 동기가 없습니다. 그래서 그 건강한 동기 중에 그 자비의 동기, 사랑의 동기 그게 매우 중요하고요. 그거에 훈련을 합니다. 그러니까 다시 강조드립니다만 그 불건강한 동기에 포커스 두시기보다는 건강한 동기, 그 사람의 지혜롭게 살 수 있는 그런 동기들, 또 특히 자비 관련, 사랑 자비 관련된 동기를 활성화시키는 거 중요합니다. 그러니까 아까 익스피리언스 어보이던스 같은 경우에도 보면 자꾸 도망가려고 그러거든요. 그럼 마인드풀니스는 뭐냐면 메디테이션은 그냥 그 리셋하는 거예요. 그 내가 돌아가는 그 루머네이트 하는 게 너무 습관이 돼 있어. 너무 오랜 세월을 루머네이트 해왔기 때문에 잘 안 고쳐져요. 그래서 제가 강조하는 게 메디테이션 중에서도 행위 명상을 강조합니다. 조용히 호흡 명상도 좋은데 제가 왜 행위 명상을 강조하냐면 행위는 매일 하니까. 이 닦기, 식사하기, 설거지하기, 샤워하기, 걷기 매일 해야 돼요. 청소하기 매일 해야 돼요. 그때 멈추세요. 우리 동기인지를 멈추세요. 그게 잘 안 멈춰질 거예요. 그래서 메디테이션에서는 감각이 매우 중요해요. 센세이션. 그렇다고 센세이션에 주의를 너무 두면 그것도 명상이 안 돼요. 그게 자전거 타고 비슷한데 감각의 문을 연다. 감각의 문을 연다는 기분으로 감각을 들이시면 아까 뭐라 그랬어요? 정보 처리 용량 제한성. 그래서 이 습관적인 루머네이션의 그 thought, 그 desire, 그러니까 motivation, cognition의 컴플렉스가 내려가게 돼요. 센세이션이 들어오는 만큼. 그러니까 명상은 이렇게 표현할 수도 있어요. 감각과 친해지는 훈련이야. 또 다른 말로는 내 몸과 친해지는 거야. 내 몸은 바디는 센세이션의 집합입니다. 여러분이 센세이션이 없으면 바디가 없다고 할 수 있어요. 그러니까 이 명상 훈련을 통해서 여러분은 감각과 이 세계를 회복하게 돼요. 스트레스 많은 사람의 특징이 뭐냐면 감각이 흐릿합니다. 어떤 내담자는요, 우울증 때문에 상담을 받았는데 6개월 동안이나 그 상담자의 그 오피스에 왔는데 그 오피스에 있는 그 전화기 색깔이 빨갰거든요. 그 빨간색을 기억 못해요. 6개월을 왔다 갔다 했는데. 왜? 스트레스 많은 사람, 증상이 많은 사람은 어텐션이 어디가 있어요? 스트레스에, 증상에, 루머네이트 합니다. 그러니까 정보 처리 용량 제한성. 이 주변의 세계의 감각에 보낼 수 있는 정신 자원이 적을 수밖에 없죠. 그러니까 악순환이죠. 거꾸로 이제 내 주변 세계의 감각에 관심을 갖기 시작할 때 정보 처리 용량 제한성, 제로섬 게임. 그러니까 이 루머네이션이 줄 수밖에 있어요. 줄 수밖에 없죠. 여러분 멘탈 아이러니 이펙트가 있어요. 생각을 하지 않으려고 하면 더 떠오릅니다. 웨그너 등의 연구가 있죠. 그걸 제가 이제 재미삼아 그렇게 불러요. 하얀 북극곰 효과라고. 왜냐하면 제가 실습할 때 자 지금부터 한 30초만 하얀 북극곰을 생각하지 말아주세요 라고 부탁하면 성공하는 사람이 몇 명 있겠습니까? 부탁 안 했으면 생각 안 했겠죠. 그러니까 생각 안 하려고 하면 더 떠오릅니다. 근데 문득 그냥 감각에 주변 감각, 몸 감각, 호흡 명상도 결국은 몸 명상의 일부입니다. 일종입니다. 그래서 이 바디 스캔이라는 말을 제가 별로 안 좋아하는데 이 몸 명상, 이런 몸 명상이라는 말을 더 좋아해요. 왜냐하면 바디 스캔 그러면 대부분 사람들이 어떤 용도로 쓰냐면 수면용으로 써요. 여러분 그렇지 않아요? 진짜 이 몸 명상은 몸과 친해지는 거예요. 뭐 설사 몸 명상하다가 잠이 들었더라도 깨나시고 한 번 더 하세요. 맑은 정신으로. 그러면 좋습니다. 그래서 몸과 친해지는 겁니다. 감각과. 지하철 탔을 때 얼굴만 봐도 돼요. 손이나 발만 봐도 됩니다. 됐어, 오케이. 그 정도만 해도 돼요. 시간 남으면 전체를 하고요. 그래서 제일 좋은 건 행위 명상이다. 걸을 때 걷기만 하는. 설거지할 때 설거지만 하고. 그 감각을 음미하세요. 여기서 중요한 게 뭐냐면요. 명상을 하다 보면 안 가르쳐도 마음 챙김까지 가는 분들이 나와요. 근데 가르치면 더 빨리 오죠. 내가 명상 상태에 한 10초라도 계속 있긴 좀 어려웠겠죠. 초보자니까. 호흡 명상 하다가도 딴 생각 나고 하잖아요. 설거지 하다가도 딴 생각 나잖아요. 이 닦다가도 딴 생각 많이 하잖아요. 그렇지만 자꾸 연습하면 고요할 때가 있죠. 그 고요할 때 나 있나요? 그 고요할 때 나 누구죠? 거기 욕구 생각이 잠시라도 10초라도 아니 5초라도 욕구 생각이 멈췄어. 쉬어졌어. 무대 아래로 내려갔어. 그때 나 누군가요? Who am I? 제가 명상 설명할 때 명상과 마음 챙김을 함께하는 마음 챙김 명상을 할 때 이 그림을 보여줍니다. 제가 몇 시까지 해야 되죠? 5시까지 해도 되나요? 네, 고맙습니다. 이거 제로섬 관계 얘기입니다. 센세이션으로 소트 디자이어를 내리는 거고요. 여기 다시 강조합니다. 메디테이션은 베어 어텐션입니다. 요거는 이제 여러분 아까 설명드린 거 이 유튜브로 오시면 보실 수 있습니다. 제가 오늘 기대가 되는데요. 구독자가 막 우상향할 것 같아. 마인드풀리스 정의는 뭐라고요? 베어 메타 어텐션입니다. 나를 객관화하는 것이고 이 억셉턴스 하는 것과 아주 관련이 높아요. 아까 그 잊어버리지는 말씀드리면 익스피리언스 어보이던스를 대하는 태도, 그러니까 마인드 소사이어티 티오리, 마음사 이론이 왜 유익하냐면 마음 챙김을 하려고 해도 내 마음을 하나라고 생각하잖아요. 그럼 잘 안 보여. 나의 부정적인 모습이 잘 안 보여. 근데 나의 부정적인 모습도 뭐다? n분의 1이구나. n분의 1이라는 걸 받아들이면 나의 부족한 점도 받아들이기가 좀 쉬워집니다. 실제로 저한테 이제 MMPT 교육받은 사람 중에 한 사람이 저한테 이메일을 보냈어요. 그 사람이 여러 차례 여러 상담자한테 우울 때문에 상담받았는데 잘 안 낫대요. 근데 교수님의 그 마음사 이론을 공부하고서는 그래 내가 지금 이 못난 이 나 때문에 계속 그 씨름하고 있었고 그것 때문에 괴로워하고 있었는데 n분의 1이구나. 그 놈이 나의 전체가 아니라 n분의 1이구나 하는 순간 제법 괜찮은 나들도 보이더라고요. 눈이 바뀌기 시작한 거죠. 그 자신의 그 마이너스적인 부분에 언헬티한 부분에 이렇게 포커스 됐던 마인드가 바뀌기 시작하는 거죠. 그러면서 제가 아까 말씀드린 대로 마음사 이론을 이해하기 시작하면 마음이 열리기 시작합니다. 그래서 심리적 유연성, psychological flexibility가 증진되는 것이죠. 그래서 그 부분과 연결할 수 있는데 또 하나는 그런 n분의 1로 보기 시작할 때 마인드풀리스도 쉬워진다. 내 마음의 부정적인 부분도 볼 수 있게 되고요. 그래서 이 아까 그 페인도 그렇고 서퍼링, 우리가 말하는 괴로움, 서퍼링 혹은 페인 다 우리 고통스러운 것들이죠. 그거를 대하는 관계가 바뀌어요. 그러니까 그동안은 나와의 관계라는 걸 생각한 적이 없어요. 나는 나지, 나는 엄마와 관계하고 나는 아버지와 관계하고 나는 친구와 관계하는 거지 내가 나랑 어떻게 관계해? 나는 나지? 가 바뀝니다. 마인드 소사이어티야. 여러 나들이 있어. 나들 간의 관계라는 게 있구나. 그래서 내가 열등감 느끼고 자존감이 낮구나. 내가 나를 그래도 좀 잘된 놈 만들려고 자기 개발한다고 하고 자기 개발책 읽고 너 쉬지 말라고 나를 몰아붙이고 마치 지옥에서 온 보스처럼 나를 밀어붙인 결과 힘들어지잖아요. 자존감이 떨어지잖아요. 그러니까 나를 드라이브하는 놈이 있는 거야. 그거 한 놈은 또 그걸 당하는 놈이 있고 여러 나들이 있는데 그들을 잘 우리가 이제 민주사회를 유지하려면 서로 커뮤니케이션을 잘해야 되잖아요. 그래야 민주사회가 잘 돌아가잖아요. 우리 대한민국도 마찬가지로 우리 마인드에도 여러 나들을 잘 이해하고 이 여러 나들을 잘 조화 있게 해야 마인드가 건강하거든요. 그러니까 이 말하자면 마음 쿵푸의 마스터라고 한다면은 이런 마음 사회의 정치를 잘한다고 할 수 있겠어요. 그래서 이 마음 사회에서 그 부족한 나들을 대할 때 걔네들을 인달제라는 뜻은 아니에요. 걔네들 방종하게 하는 뜻은 아니지만 걔네들을 수용하는 게 중요합니다. 수용한다는 게 걔네들 멋대로 한다는 뜻은 아니에요. 내가 그걸 알아준다는 거죠. 예를 들면 어머니가 아이가 아픈데 수술을 해야 되고 어쩔 수 없이 통증에서 호소를 해요. 그렇다고 그 수술을 그 외과적인 처치를 멈출 수는 없어요. 그때 어머니가 같이 웁니다. 같이 울면서 알아줘요. 그 아이를 안아줘요. 그것이 아이한테 도움이 되겠죠. 마찬가지로 나와의 관계에서 하나는 좀 아버지 같은 건데 마음 챙김이에요. 마음 챙김은 좀 아버지 같다고 할까요? 있는 그대로 바라보는 거예요. 근데 러빙 컴패션, 이 자비의 눈으로 보는 것은 제가 방금 예를 든 것처럼 안아주는 거예요. 같이 울면서. 그 아이가 지금 외과적인 수술을 해야 돼. 근데 막 울고 그래. 그렇지만 안 할 수는 없어요. 그러니까 그 아이가 당장 원하는 것은 안 하는 거지만 그거를 허락하지는 못해. 허락하지는 못하지만 그 안타까운 마음으로 함께 안아주는 거죠. 그런 자비의 눈을 갖추는 거. 그러니까 이 자비 수행, 자비의 동기, 이 자비는 동기입니다. 단순한 이모션이 아니에요. 강한 동기예요. 상대를, 그게 나를 향할 수도 있고 너를 향할 수도 있고 그 상대방을 건강하게 하고 웰빙을 주고 플라리싱을 주고 고통을 제거해 주는 거, 그런 마음이 러빙 컴패션, 자비라고 하는 거거든요. 그래서 그런 마음이 이 21세기 자본주의 살다 보니까 무한 경쟁 속에서 점점 이제 좀 무대 바깥에서 노는 거죠. 그 걔를 자꾸 불러 올려와야 돼요. 자꾸 우리 마음사회 훈련, 트레이닝 통해서 자꾸 올리는 연습해야 됩니다. 그러면 내 고통, 내가 익스피리언스 어보이던스 하려고 하는 그놈을 마음 챙김으로 보는 게 한 방법이고요. 자비의 눈으로 감싸주면서 보는 것도 또 한 방법입니다. 두 가지 방법이 다 효과 있을 수 있고요. 아까 말씀드린 대로 PBT로 보자면 어떤 사람한테는 마음 챙김적인 게 더 와닿을 수 있고 어떤 사람한테는 자비적인 관점이 더 와닿을 수 있겠죠. 혹은 둘 다 할 수도 있겠죠. 그래서 이런 방식으로 우리 내면의 건강한 나들을 키워나가는 거, 그런 부분이 매우 중요합니다. 이게 하나하나 하다가 힘들어서 이렇게 한꺼번에 했는데 지금 0.나 제가 설명하다 다른 데로 갔는데요. 0.나는 뭐냐면 아까 명상하다가 고요한 순간입니다. 여러분 이게 뭡니까? 파도라 그러죠? 네, 파도. 이의가 없습니다. 이건 뭔가요? 바다. 그게 좀 재밌게도 이 둘 다 바다 아닌가요? 둘 다 바다인데 우리는 이것을 파도라고 불러요. 그리고 이것은 바다라 부릅니다. 혹은 잔잔한 바다라고 불러요. 이 두 가지가 같은 바다죠. 제가 명상하다가 고요한 순간에 내가 없어. 우리가 나라 그럴 때는 뭐 내가 예를 들면 김치가 그러면 매운 김치를 좋아해, 백김치를 좋아해, 뭐 젓갈 담근 김치를 좋아해, 뭐 이런 저런 김치 다양한 걸 좋아할 수 있잖아요. 뭐 스파게티도 다양한, 나는 이런 스파게티를 좋아해. 사람마다 다르잖아요. 그게 나잖아요. 나는 국힘당을 좋아해, 나는 민주당을 지지해. 그런 게 나잖아요. 근데 그런 게 지금 명상 동안에는 내려가 있잖아요. 없어요. 그럼 내가 누구예요? 없잖아요. 근데 없는 나가 있잖아요. 내가 졸도해 있지 않고 졸고 있지 않잖아요. 깨어 있잖아요. 그래서 그걸 제가 0.나라 그래요. 저울에 0점이 있잖아요. 0점의 눈금이 있잖아요. 그래서 제가 비유를 합니다. 마음 저울이 있는데 그 명상 상태에 갈 때 우리가 그 0점에 간다. 그때 우리가 근데 그게 난 줄을 몰라. 50kg에 나, 어떤 사람은 60kg에 나, 어떤 사람들은 그게 일종의 저거는 시그니처 왜 메뉴라는 거 있죠? 레스토랑 가거나 카페에 가면 그 시그니처 메뉴가 있잖아. 그것처럼 우리 마인드에도 시그니처 아이가 있다고 말할 수 있어요. 여러분이 나는 누구야 할 때 그 시그니처 아이가 있는 거죠. 그 밖에 물론 많은 나들이 있겠습니다만 그 나가 지금 누군가를 한번 좀 돌아보시는데 그 나들이 내려갔을 때 그 스틸리스에서 그냥 명상만 하고 나오면 그냥 고요히 있다 나왔어. 오케이. 릴렉스하고 좋았어. 근데 그때 마음 챙김이 되잖아요. 내가 있다는 게 느껴져요. 뭐라고 할 수 없는 나. 없는 나. 그래서 제가 그거를 0.나를 zero i를 nobody 나라고 불러요. nobody I. 왜? 말로 표현하면 역설적이에요. 거기 나가 없거든. 그 nobody가 있어. 그 nobody I야. 저울에, 마음 저울에 0점 같은 나야. 그래서 우리가 평소에 자꾸 이 닦으며 그 감각에 주의하고 또 설거지하며 걸으며 그때 내가 욕구 생각을 내려놓는 레스팅 연습을 자꾸 하면 모르는 사이에 이 0점 연습이 돼요. 거기다가 마음 챙김이 함께하게 되면 그 명상할 때 마음 챙김이 함께하면 0점 나라는 거를 자각하기 시작해요. 그럼 이게 나는 그 사람의 마음 건강에 매우 중요한 것 같아요. 내가 때로는 이 사인 커브처럼 뭐 기쁠 때도 있고 슬플 때도 있고 우울할 때도 있고 불안할 때도 있고 뭐 재미있을 때도 있고 뭐 여러 가지 경우가 있잖아요. 그러나 그 모든 상황에서도 나는 내 0점이 있구나. 내 기본값은 0점이구나. 그걸 잊지 않고 늘 돌아올 수 있는. 그 마인드풀리스의 그 빨리어로는 사띠라고 그러죠. 사띠. 이 사띠라는 말에 그 리멤버링, 그 기억이라는 게 있거든요. 그런 걸 잊지 않는 것도 도움이 됩니다. 내 0점 나라고 하는 거를 이걸 알기만 해도 평소에 어려운 일이 있다가도 그게 굉장히 위로가 돼요. 물론 실력이 있으면 탁 그 상태로 언제든지 갈 수 있으면 좋죠. 그래서 제가 끝으로 말씀드리면 이 자칫하게 되면은 이 명상에 빠지다 보면 다 지리산 가려고 그래. 뭐 도 닦으러. 그거 아니다. 명상한다고 도 닦는 거 아니고 이 서울에서 복잡한 서울에서 살아야 된다. 그걸 제가 강조합니다. 그래서 제가 이 삼각형 모형에서 쓴다, use, 긍정 심리를 강조해요. 저울이 0점만 잡고 있으면 그건 저울이 아니다. 아니 5kg를 올려도 0점이에요. 0점은 너무 잘 잡아. 50kg 올려도 0점, 80kg 올려도 0점. 그건 고장난 저울이죠. 50kg 올리면 50kg를 딱 가리켜야 돼. 그러나 내려놓으면 다시 딱 0점. 80kg 올려놓으면 80kg 가리켜야 돼. 내려놓으면 곧바로 0점. 이게 실력인 거죠. 그래서 이 쓴다, 다양한 그 모티베이션, 카그니션 이런 다양한 웰빙 인지 기법, 웰빙 행동 뒤에 어떤 웰빙 동기 이런 것들을 공부하면서 숙달해 가는 과정, 이것이 이제 우리한테 이제 필요한 게 아니냐. 그래서 여러 가지 뭐 자세한 기법들은 여러분 보시라고 그렇게 한 거지 제가 이게 다 할 수 있다고 생각 안 했어요. 어떻게 1시간에 다 할 수 있겠어요. 나중에 시간 나실 때 보시라는 의미로 해드린 겁니다. 그래서 관련된 레퍼런스도 뒤에 보시고요. 여기 뭐 여러 가지 못 따라서 아쉽습니다만 네. 나중에 보시고 끝으로 어쨌든 MMPT는 기억 남는 게 Zero I, 내 안에 다양한 눈, 건강한 나들을 양성하는구나. Zero I, 또 Wise I, Wisdom을 양성하고 또 Warm I, Loving Compassion의 I를 양성하는 거다. 또 필요하신 것들은 요 아까 말씀드린 요거는 아까 그 중년 여성 그 앵자이티 부분이 요겁니다. 그래서 그 동영상하고 온라인으로 했던 연구, 요거는 이제 건강심리학 기재 발표된 거고, 그다음에 또 다른 연구, 우울 관련된 연구했고요. 지금 MMPT 연구는 지금 계속 나오는 중이고, 여러분이 하신다면 제가 도와드리겠습니다. 물론 외국에서 하신다 해도 도와드리겠습니다. 참고 자료 이거는 우리말로 좀 한 거고요. 네, 다시 한번 끝으로 유튜브 이렇게 다시 한번 이렇게 공지하면서 마치겠습니다. 감사합니다.
네. 네, 감사합니다. 그 명상, 마음챙김, 그 긍정심리를 이렇게 매일 훈련함으로써 우리가 좀 마음 공부하는 길에 이를 수 있도록 안내를 잘 해주신 것 같습니다. 자, 이제 그 네 분의 발표가 모두 끝났습니다. 아쉬운 마음이 큰데요. 그래도 시간이 조금 지났기 때문에 정리하려 하고요. 오늘 귀한 발표해 주신 네 분 교수님들 너무 감사드리는데요. 특히 멀리서 와주신 미국 캘리포니아 주립대학교 샌 버나디노의 마이클 교수님, 그리고 스웨덴 웁살라 대학교의 그 알렉산더 로젠탈 교수님, 그리고 모니카 버만 교수님, 그리고 덕성여자대학교 김정호 교수님 모두 정말 마음 깊이 감사드립니다. 네, 그리고 마지막으로 이 자리에 이렇게 끝까지 참석해 주신 여러분들께도 감사의 마음을 제가 전하고 싶습니다. 오늘 이곳에 참석하신 분들께는 저희가 이제 그 URL을 드릴 거예요. 이 강의 뭐라고 할까요? 만족도 조사 링크를 보내드릴 겁니다. 그래서 이게 왜 중요하냐면 우리가 이 좋은 세미나를 매년 현재 개최하고 있는데요. 더 좋은 세미나를 준비하는데 좀 도움이 될 자료들을 여러분들로부터 얻으려고 하는 거예요. 그래서 꼭 답변해 주시면 감사하겠고요. 또 퇴장 시에는 좀 혼잡이 그래도 예상됩니다. 그래서 출입구에서 가까운 곳에 계신 분부터 차례대로 퇴장해 주시면 되겠고요. 또 통역기를 접수대에 반납하시면서 신분증 받아가시는 거 잊지 마시고요. 또 오늘 이곳에 오신 여러분들을 위해서 아까 제가 말씀드렸듯이 우리 학교에서 기념품 준비했습니다. 그것도 꼭 챙겨 받아가시기 바랍니다. 그리고 저희가 이 자료집을 조금 넉넉하게 준비했어요. 그래서 혹시 이곳에 정말 오고 싶었는데 사실은 다음 주가 시험 주간이잖아요. 그래서 못 오신 분들이 많아요. 제가 알기에도 되게 많은 분들이 아쉬움을 토로했는데요. 그분들을 위해서 자료집 챙겨가셔도 좋겠습니다. 자, 그럼 이것으로 2023년 제23회 국제상담심리세미나를 모두 마치겠습니다. 감사합니다.